Hey there, story lovers. This is Arcane Paradox, and we're bringing you an epic adventure. Gringotts' inheritance test at age 10 exposed 91 illegal bindings on Harry, and Veela Nation crowned him king. Hit like, subscribe, and let's begin this journey. Chapter 1, The Test. The letter arrived on a Tuesday. Not the Hogwarts letter, that was still a year away, but a different one entirely, sealed in black wax, stamped with a pickaxe crossed over a key, and addressed in handwriting so precise it looked like it had been carved rather than written. The envelope was addressed to Mr. Harry J. Potter, the smallest bedroom, number 4 Privet Drive, Little Whinging, Surrey, and it arrived not by owl but slipped under the front door sometime before dawn, which was how it avoided Vernon Dursley's morning newspaper routine entirely. Harry found it when he crept downstairs to start breakfast. He almost didn't pick it up. His aunt had a strict policy about Harry touching anything that wasn't his to touch, and after the incident with Dudley's birthday cake last spring, which honestly hadn't been his fault, the icing had just moved, he'd developed a cautious relationship with anything unexpected. But the envelope had his name on it. His full name, middle initial, and everything, which almost nobody knew. So he tucked it into the waistband of his oversized pajama bottoms and got the bacon going before his uncle came downstairs. He read it in the bathroom, sitting on the cold tile floor with the door locked, while the shower ran to cover any suspicious silence. Mr. Potter, you are invited to attend an inheritance assessment at Gringotts Wizarding Bank, 1 Diagon Alley, London, on the morning of your 10th birthday, the 31st of July, at 9 o'clock precisely. This assessment has been arranged under Clause 7 of the Ancient Pacts, which supersedes all prior custodial arrangements. Attendance is not optional. A portkey has been enclosed. It will activate at 8:30. Hold it in your right hand. Ragnarok, Director, Gringotts Wizarding Bank. Harry turned the envelope upside down and a small bronze coin fell into his palm. It had a pickaxe on one side and something that looked like a family crest on the other, a stag and a lightning bolt, which he thought was a strange combination until he remembered the lightning bolt on his forehead and felt a peculiar, wordless recognition settle in his chest. He'd heard of Gringotts. Mrs. Figg mentioned it sometimes in that way she had of letting things slip and then catching herself, but Harry had a good memory and a habit of stitching together fragments. Wizarding Bank. Run by goblins. His parents had left him money there, which the Dursleys had never mentioned, not once, in 10 years. He sat with that thought for a moment. 10 years. Today was his birthday. He'd been alive for 10 years, and the Dursleys had never once mentioned that he had a bank account. Harry looked at the coin in his palm, then looked at his own hand, too thin, knuckles a little sharp, a burned scar along the thumb from last month's cooking incident. He closed his fingers around the portkey. "All right," he said quietly to nobody in particular. He didn't go back to sleep. He watched the clock. At 8:30, standing in the back garden behind the garden shed where nobody could see him from the kitchen window, Harry Potter held a bronze coin in his right hand and felt the world wrench sideways. Portkey travel, he would later reflect, was the magical equivalent of being grabbed by the navel and flung through a tunnel of bad decisions. He landed on a marble floor in a crouch, managed not to fall over, and straightened up to find himself standing in the entrance hall of the most aggressively intimidating building he'd ever been inside. Gringotts was tall in the way that mountains were tall. It didn't invite you to look up so much as it made you feel small for existing at ground level. The marble was white-veined gray, the chandeliers were iron, and behind an enormous reception counter sat a row of goblins doing ledger work with the focused intensity of people who had decided that numbers were the most important thing in the universe and everything else was a distraction. One of them looked up. Then, oddly, it stood. The others looked up too. Harry had the distinct impression that goblins did not often stand for visitors. Mr. Potter. The goblin who had stood was shorter than Harry, which was genuinely impressive given that Harry was 10 and underfed. It had sharp amber eyes and hands that were very still in that way that meant it was paying close attention. "I am Ragnarok. We have been expecting you." "You sent the letter," Harry said. "I did. What's an inheritance assessment?" Ragnarok regarded him for a moment with an expression Harry couldn't quite read, something between approval and something heavier. "Come," he said. "I will show you rather than tell you. It is faster, and more honest." Harry followed him. They went down. Not through the main vaults. Harry caught glimpses of those through iron doors as they passed, the sound of distant cartwheels on tracks echoing up through the stone, but through a different corridor entirely, narrower and older, lit by torches that burned a deep amber rather than orange. The walls here were carved with text in a language Harry didn't recognize, and the floor sloped gradually downward in a way that made his ears pop. 4 other goblins fell into step behind them without being told. They didn't speak. The ancient pacts, Harry said, because walking in silence made him anxious and he'd found that asking questions was better than letting anxiety build into something unmanageable. "What are they?" "Agreements between our nation and the old wizarding families," Ragnarok said, without slowing. "Predating the ministry by several centuries. The pacts guarantee certain rights, the right to inheritance assessment being among them. No magical guardian, no custodian, no government body can override them. My aunt and uncle aren't magical." "No. But someone magical appointed them your guardians and constructed the arrangement around you. That arrangement has suppressed your access to the assessment since your first birthday." Ragnarok paused at a door that was a single slab of black stone. It should not have been possible. Someone with considerable influence made it possible. He pressed his palm to the stone. It opened inward. "The room beyond will show us what has been done to you," Ragnarok said. "I want you to be prepared for the possibility that it is significant." Harry thought about his cupboard under the stairs. About Dudley's second bedroom that became a storage room for Dudley's broken toys. About the way his hair grew back overnight after his aunt shaved it, and the way the glass on the boa constrictor's tank at the zoo had simply gone last summer, just vanished between one moment and the next. "I think," Harry said, "I'm probably already prepared." The room was circular. In the center stood a shallow stone basin, about the width of a table, filled with something that shimmered like water but moved more slowly, more deliberately, like liquid that had somewhere to be. Around the basin, carved into the floor, was a circle of text in that same language from the corridor. "Blood inheritance assessment," Ragnarok said. 3 drops. The basin reads your magical lineage, active bindings, suppression seals, and the current state of your core. It is entirely painless and entirely accurate. Gringotts has done this assessment for 14 centuries. We have never had a false result. A goblin handed Harry a small pin. Not asked, handed, with the kind of practiced efficiency that suggested this was not a moment for lengthy deliberation. Harry pricked his finger, held it over the basin, and let 3 drops fall. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the liquid turned gold. Then it turned white. Then the room started shaking. Not violently, not at first. Just a deep, subsonic tremor that Harry felt in his back teeth and the soles of his feet, the kind of vibration that suggested something very large was paying attention. The goblin scribes along the walls began writing furiously. The liquid in the basin rose in a slow column, and shapes formed in it, names, Harry realized. Family names, branching outward from a central point like the world's most complicated family tree. He saw Potter. He saw Peveril, which he didn't recognize. He saw a third name, in a script that looked older than the others, 2 words, neither of which was English. Then the column split. Numbers began appearing at the base of the basin, carved into the light itself, glowing red-orange against the gold. Each number appeared with a sound like a chain link snapping. 1. 7. 14. 22. The goblins had stopped writing. They were watching. 31. 45. 58. What are those numbers? Harry asked, because nobody was explaining and the room was still trembling and he liked to know things. Ragnarok's voice, when he answered, was very controlled. Each number represents a magical binding placed on your core without your consent. 67. 73. How many can a person normally have? Harry asked. 0, said Ragnarok. In a lifetime of completely unremarkable magical existence, a wizard might acquire 2 or 3 incidental seals. Regulatory bindings placed at birth. They are minor. They are documented. He paused. They are legal. 81. 87. 90. 91. The number held. The room stopped shaking. The light in the basin shifted from burning red-orange to a deep, pulsing violet that cast strange shadows across the walls, and in the silence that followed, Harry could hear the scribe's quill scratching again, frantically, as though trying to catch up with something that had already gotten away from them. Harry looked at the number 91 floating in a column of violet light above a stone basin in the depths of Gringotts Bank. "Someone put 91 bindings on me," he said. "Yes. While I was alive. The first were placed within hours of your birth. The most recent is approximately 8 months old." Harry was quiet for a long moment. Outside, far above them and impossibly distant, London was going about its Tuesday morning business. Cars and buses and people in offices who did not know that 10 floors beneath a bank on a street they'd never heard of, a 10-year-old boy was doing arithmetic on what had been stolen from him. "Take them off," Harry said. Ragnarok looked at him with those sharp amber eyes. "That is what we intend to do. I want you to understand, however, that when we do, your magical core will expand to its natural state. This has not happened gradually over 10 years the way it should have. It will happen at once. Will it hurt?" "No," Ragnarok said. "It will feel like something that was always supposed to happen, finally happening." Harry nodded. "Then take them off." The removal process took 2 hours. Harry sat in the center of the runic circle on a stone chair that goblins brought in, and 5 senior cursebreakers worked in careful rotation, each one addressing the bindings in layers. The first layer peeled away easily. Those were the superficial ones, the minister-registered restrictions that were technically legal even if their cumulative effect was not. Harry felt those go like removing a coat he'd been wearing so long he'd forgotten it wasn't his skin. The second layer was harder. These were older, woven into his core like thread through fabric, and the cursebreakers had to work carefully and methodically, talking to each other in gobbledygook too quickly for Harry to follow. He felt each one of these go as a small, sharp sensation, not painful, but present, like the moment you stop holding your breath and don't realize until the breath leaves how long you've been holding it. He felt himself getting warmer. Not temperature warm. Something else. Like a banked fire being given air. The third layer stopped the room cold. The lead cursebreaker said something short and sharp in gobbledygook. Ragnarok crossed the room in 3 strides. They conferred in low, rapid tones. Harry watched their faces. "These are not ministry bindings," Ragnarok said finally, turning back to Harry. His voice was still controlled, but there was something underneath it now. "Nor are they incidental. These were placed by hand, by someone who knew exactly what they were doing." A pause. "We have identified the magical signature." "Whose?" Harry asked. Ragnarok held his gaze for a moment. "Albus Percival Wulfric Brian Dumbledore." Harry let that sit. He knew the name the way all children in the wizarding world knew it. Mrs. Fig had a photograph on her mantelpiece, the old man with the half-moon spectacles and the beard that seemed to have ambitions of its own. The greatest wizard of the age. The man who had defeated Grindelwald. The man who, supposedly, had looked after Harry Potter's best interests since the night Harry's parents died. How many of the 91 did he put there? Harry asked. 34. Harry breathed in. Breathed out. "Continue," he said. The fourth layer was not Dumbledore's. It was not the Ministry's either, or any goblin-registered magical authority. It was dark in a way that made the cursebreakers' hands tremble slightly as they worked, and it clung to Harry's core the way rot clings to old wood, deeply embedded, structurally integrated, as though it had been growing for years rather than placed. Harry felt these go differently from the others. Not like releasing a held breath. More like cutting a rope that had been tied around something vital, and finding that the something vital was larger than you'd thought. Much larger. The room lit up. Not metaphorically, the torches flared white, the carved text on the walls began to glow, and the residue in the basin pulsed like a second heartbeat. One of the curse breakers stepped back involuntarily. Another said something reverent-sounding in gobbledygook. Ragnar didn't step back. He watched with the expression of a man who has waited a long time for something to arrive. The last binding came off like a dam breaking. Harry didn't move. He sat very still in the stone chair in the center of the runic circle and felt 10 years of suppression dissolve all at once. His magic, not the stunted, accidental, occasionally explosive thing he'd been managing since childhood, but his actual magic, filled the space that had been compressed for a decade and just kept going. He felt the floor beneath him, the stone, the mountain of vault tunnels below, the deep water table under London. He felt the other wizards in the building above him as warm presences, and the city beyond that as an enormous, humming complexity that he could not yet read clearly but could absolutely feel. He felt the scar on his forehead ache sharply, once, and then go quiet. He felt 3 distinct streams of his heritage settle into place like keys sliding into locks, Potter, solid and direct. Peveril, old and strange and vast. And the third one, the one in the foreign script, warm and wild and entirely unlike anything the books misses. Fig had accidentally left within his reach had ever described. Done, the lead cursebreaker said quietly. Harry opened his eyes. The room looked exactly the same as before. Harry looked exactly the same thin face, same messy hair, same green eyes behind glasses he didn't actually need anymore but didn't know that yet. Nothing dramatic had changed on the outside. On the inside, it was like standing in a field after spending his entire life in the cupboard under the stairs. The third bloodline, Harry said. The one in the foreign script. What is it? Ragnar sat down across from him. This, too, was something goblins apparently did not often do. The other goblins in the room seemed to register it as significant. The Stormborn line, Ragnar said. An old wizarding family that held a blood bond with the Veela Nation several centuries ago. A formal bonding, rare even then, that integrated specific Veela traits into the family's magical inheritance. Your paternal grandmother was the last Stormborn witch. The line was considered dormant. It has not been dormant. It's been bound, Harry said. Yes. Those were among the deepest bindings, not Dumbledore's, not Voldemort's remnants. These were placed very old, and very deliberately, by people who knew what the Stormborn line could become. Ragnar's amber eyes were steady. Among the Veela Nation, the Stormborn heir holds a specific status. Sovereignty, by their law. When we removed the final binding, there were instruments registered with the Veela Nation that would have responded. They'll know, Harry said. They already know, Ragnar confirmed. The Veela Nation has been monitoring those instruments for 9 years. Harry sat with this. Outside, far above, in the ordinary Tuesday morning of London, he could still feel the pulse of the city. He could feel, now that he knew to look for it, a very distant resonance somewhere to the southeast, across water. Something old and powerful and distinctly other than anything British, vibrating at a frequency that matched something in his chest. I have a question, Harry said. Ask. Dumbledore placed 34 of those bindings. Voldemort's soul fragment placed some of the others. The Ministry placed the rest. Harry looked at Ragnar directly. You're a goblin bank director in a city where all of these people have power over you. Why did you help me? Ragnar held his gaze for a long moment. The ancient pact between Gringotts and the Stormborn line grants goblinkind 3 things, he said. One is the right of free commerce in any territory where the Stormborn heir holds sovereignty. The second is formal diplomatic standing in the Veela Nation, which has historically refused to grant it. He paused. The third is something personal to my house, and not your concern. But your motivations aren't purely altruistic, Harry said. No. Are yours? Harry almost smiled. I don't have motivations yet. I've been awake for 4 hours. Then you have time to develop some. Ragnar stood. There are documents to sign. Your full inheritance, the Potter vaults, the Peveril estate holdings, the Stormborn properties, will be transferred to your direct control. You are 10 years old, which means the Ministry will attempt to argue that you require a guardian for financial decisions. The ancient pacts supersede this. You will have full access. How much is there? Harry asked. Ragnar said a number. Harry blinked. Say that again, Harry said. Ragnar said it again. Harry looked at the ceiling for a moment, doing the arithmetic. I've been sleeping in a cupboard, he said, not with any particular heat. Just the flat, clear observation of someone adjusting their understanding of a situation. Yes, Ragnar said. You have. The documents took another hour. Harry signed his name 37 times on parchment that felt more substantial than paper, with a quill that wrote in something that wasn't ink, or wasn't only ink, because it seemed to leave a faint warmth in his fingertip after each stroke, like a handshake. He read everything before signing it, which made the goblin clerks visibly impatient, but Ragnar waited without complaint and answered every question Harry asked with a directness that Harry was beginning to appreciate very much. By the time they were done, Harry James Potter was, on paper and in blood-recorded law, the sole heir and account holder of 3 family lines, the current holder of 7 properties across Britain and the continent, and, pending formal acknowledgement from the Veela Nation, which Ragnar described as a certainty rather than a possibility, the sovereign of a foreign magical nation by right of blood and ancient compact. Harry was also very hungry, because he'd missed breakfast. There is one other matter, Ragnar said, as the clerks gathered the documents. He set a sealed folder on the table between them. The assessment produced a full accounting of your bindings, who placed them, when, and the specific magical signatures. This folder contains that complete record. It is a legal document, certified by Gringotts. It is admissible in any wizarding court in Europe. Harry looked at the folder. Including the Ministry's courts. Including the Wisengamot, Ragnar confirmed. Yes. Harry picked up the folder. He didn't open it. He already knew enough of what was in it. He slid it under his arm. I'm going to need somewhere to stay, Harry said. I can't go back to Privet Drive. Not today. We anticipated this. Ragnar gestured, and a goblin appeared immediately with a key, a different kind of key from the vault keys Harry had seen, this one a bright, warm gold, shaped like a lightning bolt crossed with a stag's antler. Potter Manor is in Godric's Hollow. It has been maintained under the Potter estate. It is warded, furnished, and fully staffed by house elves. He paused. It has been waiting for you. Harry took the key. Thank you, he said. And then, because he meant it precisely and did not want it to be mistaken for the kind of reflexive politeness the Dursleys had drilled into him under pain of no dinner, genuinely. Thank you. You didn't have to do this. The pact required it, Ragnar said. The pact required the assessment. The rest was your choice. Harry held his gaze. I noticed. Ragnar made a sound that might have been a laugh if goblins laughed in the way humans did, which they didn't quite. You are very like your grandmother, he said. It sounded like a compliment of the highest order. Harry stepped out of Gringotts into Diagon Alley at 11:20 on a Tuesday morning in July, and the first thing he did was stop on the white marble steps and let the sunlight hit his face. He stood there for about 10 seconds. Then he started taking stock. He could feel his magic the way he'd never been able to feel it before, not as something unpredictable and slightly embarrassing that happened when he was frightened or angry, but as something he had, and could move, and could direct. It was warm and present and threaded through him the way blood was threaded through him, and it responded when he thought about it the way his fingers responded when he thought about moving them. The shift from before to now was so complete that he almost couldn't remember what the before had felt like, except as a sort of pressure that was suddenly gone. He could also feel the scar. It had ached sharply when the last binding came off and then gone quiet, but it was still there in a way that was distinct from a regular scar. Like something sleeping rather than something dead. He filed that under important, deal with later and walked down the steps. Diagon Alley in late July was busy with early school shopping families, and Harry walked through it without being recognized. He'd pulled his hair forward over his forehead out of pure old habit, and his clothes were Dudley's cast-offs 3 sizes too big, so he looked like nobody in particular. He found a robe shop, bought clothes that actually fit for the first time in his life, changed in the back room while the seamstress elf did the alterations in 30 seconds flat, and walked out looking like a person rather than a scarecrow. He bought food at a small bakery and ate it on a bench in the alley, watching the magical world go about its business. A boy about his age was being dragged along by his mother, protesting that he didn't want dress robes. An old witch was arguing with a wand shop proprietor through the window. 2 wizards in ministry robes walked past talking in the quick, self-important way of people who believe they are always the most important people in any given location. Harry watched them and thought about 34 bindings with Albus Dumbledore's magical signature. He thought about it the way he thought about most things, directly, without flinching, turning it over to look at it from different sides. Dumbledore had put those bindings on him. Had visited him, presumably, as an infant, and placed 34 separate magical restrictions on a baby's magical core, and then arranged for that baby to be left with non-magical relatives in a house where the child's basic needs were treated as an imposition. And had, apparently, continued placing new bindings as recently as 8 months ago, which meant he knew where Harry was, knew what was being done to him, and had chosen, consistently, to leave it in place. Harry was not performing anger about this. He genuinely felt very calm, which he recognized might be a form of shock, or might simply be who he was underneath the years of being carefully made smaller than he was. Either way, the calm was real, and useful. He'd learned very early that calm got you further than anger in most situations. He also thought about the soul fragment. The curse breakers had identified it, something lodged in the scar, which they could not remove during the session because removing it required a different kind of work, and more time, and a specialist that Ragnarok had said he would contact. Harry's scar had housed a fragment of Voldemort's soul since the night of the attack. He had, for 10 years, been carrying a piece of the darkest wizard in living memory inside his head. He finished his food and brushed crumbs off his new robes and thought that his birthday was turning out to be very educational. His new robes were dark green. He'd picked them himself. He'd never been allowed to pick his own clothes before. Small things. But they were his. At 12:30, sitting on the bench in Diagon Alley, Harry felt something shift. It was subtle, a change in the quality of the ambient magic in the street, a pressure differential, a sense of something watching that was not threatening but was absolutely present and extremely focused. He had felt it building for the past half hour, a distant resonance that had been getting closer, and now it was close enough that he turned his head before it arrived, looking southeast along the alley in the direction of the leaky cauldron. A woman stepped through the pub's back entrance into the alley. She was tall, and she moved with a deliberateness that made the crowd part without quite knowing why. She was dressed in robes the color of mountain ice, and her hair was silver gold. She was, Harry thought, somewhere in the complex territory between beautiful and more than beautiful, in the way that certain things in nature crossed the threshold from pleasant to something that made you want to step back slightly and reconsider what you thought you knew about pleasant. She was also, unmistakably, looking for him. Their eyes met at about 30 yards. She stopped walking. Harry didn't move from the bench. She crossed the distance between them with the same deliberateness, and Harry watched her come, and noted the slight narrowing of her eyes as she got closer, as if she'd expected one thing and was finding another. She stopped in front of him. She was, he guessed, in her mid to late 40s, though that probably didn't mean for her what it meant for humans. "You are Harry Potter," she said. It wasn't a question. Her accent was French, and musical, and very precise. "Yes," Harry said. She studied him for a moment with dark blue eyes that saw more than most people's eyes did, and Harry let her, because looking away felt like a game he wasn't interested in playing. "I am Apollon Delacour," she said. "Voice of the Veela Nation and mother of your emissary." She paused. "Our instruments registered the removal of the Stormborn bindings at 9:47 this morning. Our queen asked me to come ahead of the formal delegation." Another pause. She expected to find a child. "I am a child," Harry said. "I'm 10. Apollon Delacour regarded him with an expression that said she was revising her expectations in real time. "You are 10 years old," she said slowly, "and you are sitting alone in a public street having apparently just discovered that you are the sovereign of our nation, and you look," she paused, "untroubled." "I'm hungry again, actually," Harry said. "I had pastries but it was a big morning. Do you want to get lunch? I have money and I've never gotten to choose my own lunch before, so I'd like to do it at least once before whatever happens next happens." Apollon Delacour looked at him for a very long moment. Then, very carefully, as though she was not entirely sure what to do with a 10-year-old king who wanted lunch, she said, "Yes. I think that would be acceptable." They found a small restaurant off the main alley, through a door that appeared to be a delivery entrance but turned out to open onto a narrow, sun-bright courtyard with 4 tables and a menu written on a board in chalk. Harry ordered 3 things because he could. Apollon ordered tea and watched him with those calibrating blue eyes, and after a while she said, "The delegation will arrive in 5 days. The formal acknowledgement ceremony will need to be arranged." "In London?" Harry asked. "If you wish. The ceremony can be held anywhere on British soil, as the territory in question." Harry thought about this. "Not the ministry?" "Absolutely not the ministry." Something flickered across her face that was not quite amusement but was in the same neighborhood. "The Ministry of Magic has no jurisdiction over the Veela Nation's recognition of its own sovereign. But I do not recommend antagonizing them unnecessarily." "Not yet. What's my emissary like?" Harry asked. "You said you're their mother." "My daughter Fleur is 17. She is a junior diplomat and has been trained for this since she was 12. Apollon's voice shifted very slightly when she talked about her daughter, warmed, in a way she probably didn't realize. "She is forthright. And protective of what she believes is right. She may find the adjustment in expectations somewhat significant." "She expected a child," Harry said. "She expected a traumatized child in need of guidance," Apollon said, and then stopped as though she'd said more than she intended. Harry ate his second dish, which was very good. "I might still need guidance," he said. "About the Veela Nation specifically?" "I don't know much. I know almost nothing, actually." He looked at Apollon directly. "I'd rather know what I'm walking into." So she told him. For 2 hours, over lunch and tea and eventually a dessert that Harry ordered because it was his birthday and he had decided that birthdays were for eating things you wanted, Apollon Delacour told Harry Potter about the Veela Nation, its structure, its laws, its history with the Stormborn line, and what sovereignty actually meant in practical terms. She was precise and thorough and she spoke to him as though he was capable of understanding, which he appreciated more than he said. By the time they left the restaurant, the sun had moved well into the afternoon, and Harry had a working understanding of why the goblins considered the Veela alliance worth activating, and why Dumbledore had thought it important enough to suppress, and why the Ministry was going to behave very badly when they found out. He also had a Potter Manor portkey in his pocket, Apollon Delacour's contact information on a visiting card, and a very clear sense of what the next 5 days needed to accomplish. He stood at the entrance of Diagon Alley and turned the key in his hand. "Happy birthday, Mr. Potter," Apollon said behind him. "Harry," he said, without turning. "It's just Harry." He activated the portkey and was gone. Potter Manor came out of the evening mist like a promise kept after a very long wait. It was not enormous, not a castle, not the kind of ancestral pile that exists only to intimidate. It was a proper house, stone-built and old, sitting at the edge of Godric's Hollow behind a wall of mature oaks that had grown up around its wards like a second skin. The lights were on inside. The gate opened before Harry touched it. He walked up the path, and the front door opened, and a house elf with enormous amber eyes and a tea towel embroidered with a stag bowed and said in a very formal voice, "Welcome home, Master Harry." Harry looked at the house. Looked at the elf. Looked at the light coming through the leaded glass windows, warm and steady, as though it had been waiting to be seen. "Thank you," he said. And then, because he'd had a very long day and it was still his birthday, "Is there cake?" The elf's enormous eyes lit up. "There is always cake, Master Harry." Harry stepped through the door and the manor welcomed him the way old houses welcome people who belong in them, with warmth, and quiet, and the particular sense of space settling around a person as if it had always known they would come. He was 10 years old, and he was free, and the world didn't know yet what that meant. But it was going to find out. Chapter 2, The Emissary. The house elves of Potter Manor had strong opinions about breakfast. Harry discovered this on his first morning when he came downstairs at 7 and found the kitchen table set with enough food to feed a small army: eggs 3 ways, toast, grilled tomatoes, sausages, fresh fruit, something that smelled like cinnamon and turned out to be French-style pastries that had apparently been a James Potter preference, and a pot of tea so well brewed it seemed like a personal statement. The elf who had introduced herself as Tippy stood by the kitchen door with her hands folded and the quiet satisfaction of someone who had waited 9 years to do her job properly and intended to do it thoroughly now that the opportunity had finally arrived. "Is this every morning?" Harry asked. "Every morning, Master Harry." Harry sat down and ate until he was genuinely full for the first time he could remember. It took a while. Then he sat with his tea and looked out the kitchen window at the back garden, overgrown in a pleasant, deliberate sort of way, hedges gone architectural with age, a stone path disappearing into the oak wood at the far end, and thought about what needed to happen today. The list was not short. He'd spent the previous evening reading through the documentation Ragnarok had sent via elf post, which arrived before he'd finished his birthday cake, property inventories, vault accounting, the Stormborn lineage history, and a slim, densely written pamphlet on Veela Nation law that had clearly been translated by someone who found English adequate but insufficient. He'd read it all and made notes in the margins in the Potter family study, which had bookshelves floor to ceiling and a desk that seemed designed for someone who treated thinking as manual labor. He'd also found his father's old Quidditch notes and his mother's charms research journals, tucked separately on different shelves, but he'd left those for later. Some things deserved more than a tired first night. This morning's priority was magic. He finished his tea, went out to the back garden, and spent 3 hours learning what he actually had. The short version was, a great deal. The Potter magic was the most straightforward, solid, broad spectrum, built for dueling and transfiguration, the kind of core that expressed itself directly and without fuss. Harry could feel it responding to his intent before he'd fully formed the thought, which was disorienting until he adjusted, and then felt like finally being able to see without squinting. The Peveril magic was stranger. Older. It didn't respond to intent the way the Potter magic did, it responded to understanding. When Harry thought about what he wanted, it waited. When he understood why he wanted it, it moved. He spent an hour simply sitting in the garden trying to figure out what this meant in practice, and arrived at the conclusion that it was the kind of power that required patience, which was not the most immediately exciting discovery but was probably the most important one. The Stormborn magic was the most unfamiliar. It was warm in a way the others weren't, and it ran at a different frequency. If he had to describe it, he would have said it felt like standing at the edge of a thunderstorm, that charged, suspended, about to become quality just before lightning moved. It was also, he noticed, somewhat responsive to emotion in a way that the others were not, which explained some of the more spectacular accidental magic incidents of his childhood and made him feel retrospectively less guilty about the boa constrictor. He worked through exercises, simple ones first, then more complex, pushing the range of each thread, seeing how they interacted, testing the edges. By mid-morning he had reduced 3 garden ornaments to their component atoms by accident, fixed 2 of them and decided the third had always looked better as a pile of interesting pebbles, and discovered that the Stormborn magic, when he let it move freely, produced a field effect that made the air around him smell like ozone. Tippy brought him a sandwich at 11 without being asked. He ate it sitting in the long grass and thought about Dumbledore. Not with anger, still with that cool, clear-eyed calm that felt like his natural state when he wasn't being suppressed. But he was also not going to pretend that 34 bindings from a man who was supposed to be his protector was a thing he could simply set aside. It needed to be addressed. The question was when, and how, and on whose terms. His terms, obviously. That wasn't arrogance, it was just arithmetic. He was the one who'd been bound. The folder from Ragnarok was his opening hand. The Veela recognition was his position. What he needed next was someone who could operate inside the ministry's political structure, because Harry was 10 and sovereign of a foreign nation but not yet, technically, a British magical citizen with full legal standing before the Wizengamot, which was a gap he needed closed. He was thinking about this when the ward alarm sounded. Not a loud alarm, the manor's wards expressed themselves as a soft harmonic change in the air, like a tuning fork struck somewhere in the walls. Tippy appeared at the garden door. "Someone is at the gate, Master Harry." "Young witch. She says she is from the Veela Nation." Harry brushed grass off his robes and walked around to the front. Fleur Delacour was standing at the gate looking at the manor with the expression of someone who had been told one thing and arrived to find another. She was tall, taller than he'd expected from Apollin's description, with the same silver-gold hair as her mother, though worn loose to the shoulder rather than up. She was 17 and she carried herself with the particular confidence of someone who had been trained to walk into rooms and hold them, except right now that confidence was doing something more complicated because of what it was encountering. She was also, Harry noticed with the kind of frank, observational clarity that came with not having spent his formative years caring what other people thought of him, genuinely and startlingly beautiful in that specific Veela way that registered less as attraction and more as a category error, like trying to fit something that operates on a different aesthetic frequency into the ordinary human scale. The Stormborn magic in his blood meant it hit differently for him than it would for an ordinary wizard. Not as compulsion. More like recognition. He opened the gate. She looked down at him. He looked up at her. "Fleur Delacour," he said. "Harry Potter," she said. Her English was better than her mother's, with a French accent that sat on top of it like a secondary instrument. She was also, he noted, doing rapid recalculation, her eyes moving over him with quick, professional assessment, noting the robes that actually fit, the posture, the fact that he'd apparently been doing something in the garden that had left small scorch marks on the lawn behind him. "Come in," Harry said. "There's tea." She looked at him for another moment, as though checking that the situation matched her briefing. "You are 10 years old." "Yes. My mother's message said you seemed," she paused, choosing her word. "Composed." "She's being diplomatic," Harry said. She was surprised. "You can be surprised too. It's fine." He held the gate open. "Tea's getting cold." Fleur came through the gate. They sat in the front sitting room, which had high ceilings and deep window seats and a fireplace that Tippy had lit despite it being July because the manor ran on its own logic. Fleur sat very straight on the settee with her tea and watched Harry with that assessing look she hadn't quite put away yet, and Harry sat across from her and let her look, because he had nothing to hide and he found her interesting in the specific way he found anything competent and genuine interesting. "You weren't supposed to come until the delegation," Harry said. "I am the advance party," Fleur said. "Maman told you this." She said she was the advance party. She was the advance party. "I am the advance party." Fleur set her tea down. "There is a protocol difference. Maman came to assess the situation. I am here to begin preparing for the ceremony. They are different roles." "And to see for yourself," Harry said. A pause. "Yes. And to see for myself." Harry appreciated the honesty. "What were you expecting?" She considered this seriously, which he appreciated more. A child who had survived great trauma and had considerable power but did not know what to do with it. Someone who would need guidance through the political landscape. Someone, she stopped. Someone you could guide, Harry said, without any edge to it. I would not have put it that way. But that's what you expected. She met his eyes. Yes. That is what I expected. She tilted her head slightly. You are not that. I still don't know the political landscape, Harry said. Not all of it. And I've been powerful for less than 24 hours, so I wouldn't get overconfident about that part either. He looked at her steadily. But I don't need a guide. I need someone who knows things I don't, and is willing to tell me the truth about them. That's different. Fleur studied him for a long moment. You know, she said slowly, in all the years we have been watching the instruments for the Stormborn binding to break, the Queen told us stories about what the heir would be like when they finally emerged. She said, another pause, more personal this time. She said the Stormborn always came out knowing exactly who they were. That the suppression could bind the magic but not the self. She said when you came, you would already be whole. Harry looked at his tea. I don't know if I'm whole, he said. I think I'm just, clear. Things make sense now in a way they didn't before. I can see what happened and what needs to happen and I'm not. He turned the cup in his hands. I grew up in a house where I was made to feel like everything about me was wrong. Too much, too strange, too much trouble. Now I know that was deliberate. So I'm not confused about who I am. I'm just, he looked up. Angry about what was wasted. But I can work with that. Fleur was quiet for a moment. I was told you had been living with Muggles, she said carefully. My aunt and uncle. My mother's sister. Harry's tone didn't change. They didn't like me much. I am sorry. Don't be. It made me very good at reading people, which is turning out to be useful. He almost smiled. And I know where not to put a cup so it doesn't leave a ring on the table. That's probably valuable. Fleur looked at him. Then she laughed, a short, genuine laugh, nothing performed about it. You are, very strange, Harry Potter. Probably, Harry agreed. Tell me about the ceremony. She stayed for 4 hours. The ceremony, the formal coronation of recognition, as the Veela Nation called it, was, Fleur explained, both more complex and more straightforward than it sounded. The complexity was political, it needed to be held on British soil, it needed to be witnessed by a minimum of 3 senior members of the Veela Nation including the Queen's voice, and it needed to be conducted in the Old Tongue, which Harry did not speak. The straightforwardness was magical, the recognition itself was not something that could be faked, contested, or legally blocked, because it was not a vote or an appointment but a bloodline confirmation. The ceremony was the acknowledgement of something that already was. The magic had already moved. The ministry will protest, Fleur said. They'll try, Harry agreed. They may attempt to argue that a minor cannot hold foreign sovereignty. There are precedents on both sides of this argument in European wizarding law. She said this in the tone of someone who had spent considerable time reading those precedents. The strongest counter-argument is the ancient pact documentation from Gringotts, which is, if the assessment was done properly, unimpeachable. It was done by Ragnarok himself. Then it is unimpeachable. She smoothed a fold in her robes, a small, precise gesture. What worries me more is Dumbledore. Harry looked at her. Tell me. He is not, she chose carefully. He is not evil in the way that Voldemort is evil. He is not cruel. But he has a very fixed idea of how things must proceed, and a very long history of making decisions for other people without consulting them. When he discovers what has happened at Gringotts, his first instinct will not be anger. It will be, management. He'll try to put it back, Harry said. He will try to contain the situation. Reapply bindings, probably framed as safety measures. Challenge the Gringotts documentation. Invoke his authority as Supreme Mugwump to argue that international relations involving a British magical citizen require ministry oversight. She paused. He is very good at making control look like care. I know, Harry said. She looked at him. Not from experience with him, he said. I've never met him. But my aunt and uncle did the same thing. Different scale. Same mechanism. He set his cup down. Care that only works if you don't push back is not care. Fleur was quiet for a moment. No, she said. It is not. The fire popped. Outside, the afternoon was moving toward evening, the light going gold and long through the windows. There is something else, Harry said. He'd been deciding whether to bring this up for the past hour. The soul fragment. In my scar. It's a piece of Voldemort. Fleur went very still. The curse breakers identified it during the assessment. It's been there since the night he attacked me. Part of him is, housed in me. That was one of the binding's layers. Some of the bindings were suppressing my magic, some were suppressing access to my lineage, and some, he touched the scar on his forehead, lightly. Some were probably keeping that piece of him quiet. Keeping me from feeling it or working out what it was. Which means now that they are removed, Fleur said, and her voice had gone very careful, the fragment is, still there. Just not bound. Harry met her eyes. Ragnarok's people can't remove it during a standard assessment. It needs specialized work. A ritual of some kind, he said. Fleur stood up. She walked to the window and stood looking out at the garden with her back to him for about 10 seconds, and Harry could see the tension in her shoulders and understood it. She'd come to do ceremony prep and instead found a 10-year-old carrying a dead Dark Lord's soul fragment. You are telling me this, she said without turning, because you want to deal with it before the ceremony. I want to deal with it because it needs to be dealt with, Harry said. But yes. Also before the ceremony. She turned around. Veela magic includes a form of soul work, she said. Our healers are trained in it. It is not common knowledge in Britain. She paused. I am not a healer. But I know how to contact one. And I know the theory. Could it be done here? Before the delegation arrives? She looked at him for a long moment. Then, why do you trust me with this? You have known me for 4 hours. Harry considered the question honestly. Because your mother was genuinely angry about what was done to me, he said. Not performing anger, actually angry, in that quiet way people are angry when something offends them personally. And you're her daughter. He paused. Also because you haven't tried to manage me once this entire conversation. You've just talked to me. Fleur looked at him with an expression he couldn't fully categorize, something that was trying to decide what it was. I will contact our healer, she said. Her name is Sylvain. She is the best the nation has for this kind of work. She paused. She will want to come immediately, given what you've described. That's fine with me. It may take several days. I'm not going anywhere. She nodded. Then she looked around the room, at the high ceilings and the full bookshelves and the fireplace, and something in her expression shifted toward the softer end of whatever she was feeling. Your family's home is, she started. I only found it yesterday, Harry said. She looked at him. I found out it existed yesterday, he said. When I got the key from Ragnarok. He looked at the room too, at the fireplace and the shelves and the window light. I've been here one night. But it feels, he stopped, because he didn't have the right words yet for what it felt like, and he disliked imprecision. Like it was waiting, Fleur said quietly. Harry looked at her. Yes. Exactly like that. Fleur left at 6 with a promise to contact Sylvain that evening. Harry walked her to the gate and watched her apparate, a small implosion of displaced air that smelled briefly like summer storms, which he thought was appropriate for someone with Veela blood. He went back inside and spent an hour in the study with Ragnarok's documentation, cross-referencing the binding records with dates. The pattern was precise and damning. Dumbledore's first binding had been placed on the 1st of August 1981, 3 months after Harry's birth. His last had been placed in November 1990, when Harry would have been 10. The Ministry's bindings were clustered around 2 dates, one in 1981 and one in 1985, when Harry would have been 4. The Voldemort soul fragment bindings, the ones suppressing the shard, were different, not placed by any outside party but by the scar itself, a sort of self-sealing that had developed around the intrusion over the first year of Harry's life. And then there were 6 bindings that matched none of these signatures. Older. Not placed on his core the way the others were but woven into his blood, which the documentation said was unusual to the point of being notable even to experienced cursebreakers. These were the Stormborn suppressions, the original ones that Ragnarok had mentioned. Not Dumbledore's work. Not Voldemort's. Someone else entirely, at least 50 years ago by the magical dating. Someone who had known what the Stormborn line could become and had decided to stop it. Harry added that to his list of things that needed answers. He was halfway through drafting a letter to Ragnarok about it when Tippy appeared with dinner and a slightly reproachful expression that communicated, without words, that the master of the house was not to skip meals while sitting at his father's desk doing war planning. "It's not war planning," Harry said. Tippy looked at the folder of binding documentation, the open legal texts, the notes in the margins. "It is a little bit war planning," Harry admitted, and moved the papers to make room for the plate. The next morning brought 2 things. The first was a letter from Apollon Delacour, brief and precise, confirming that the delegation would arrive in 4 days and that the ceremony venue, the courtyard of the Leaky Cauldron, which was technically within the bounds of the magical quarter and therefore not ministry property, had been secured with the landlord's enthusiastic cooperation. The landlord, apparently, was a third-generation Stormborn sympathizer who had been waiting for this with the fervor of someone who had read the old histories and thought the British magical establishment needed a strong shake. The second was a letter from Gringotts, also brief, in Ragnarok's distinctive carved text style. It read, "Mr. Potter, the Ministry has been informed of yesterday's assessment. Expect contact within 48 hours. Do not sign anything they send without legal counsel. Your counsel, by the terms of the ancient pact, is this office." Harry read both letters over breakfast, finished his eggs, and went out to the garden to continue his magic work. If the Ministry was coming in 48 hours, he wanted to know exactly what he was working with. He spent the morning with the Peveril thread, which was proving to be the most interesting and the most opaque. The more he worked with it, the more convinced he became that it operated according to a logic that didn't fully translate into standard magical theory. It wasn't about force or intention, it was about truth, specifically. When he tried to use it for something that wasn't necessary, it simply declined. When he tried to use it for something that was, it was immediate and absolute. He spent 40 minutes testing its limits and arrived at the conclusion that the Peveril magic was, essentially, impossible to misuse, not because it was weak, but because it was honest in a way that cut out the space where misuse lived. He thought about that for a while. Then he tried something. He pointed 2 fingers at the far end of the garden, where an old stone wall had a section of crumbling mortar, and thought, not fix, which was intention, but simply what should this be? Which was understanding. The wall rebuilt itself in about 4 seconds. Not just the mortar, the entire section, which turned out to have had structural problems for approximately 60 years, reorganized itself back to its original state with a sound like stone finding its rightful place. Harry lowered his hand. He said. He spent the next 2 hours taking the wall apart and putting it back together, learning the Peveril thread's rhythm. Fleur arrived mid-afternoon with a woman he hadn't met. Sylvain was older than Fleur by at least 20 years, with dark hair shot through with silver and very calm hands, and she moved with the quality of someone who was always in the right place, no wasted motion, no uncertainty of position. She had a leather case and the focused attention of someone who had been briefed in transit and had already formed a working hypothesis. "You are the Stormborn heir," she said, looking at Harry without any of the recalibration that everyone else had done. Like she'd already adjusted before she arrived. "Harry," he said. "Sylvain." She set her case down on the garden table that Tippy had placed outside, apparently in anticipation. "Fleur told me about the soul fragment. I want to assess it before we discuss removal. May I?" Harry nodded. She put her hands on either side of his face, not touching, just close, about 6 inches from his temples, and he felt something that he could only describe as a careful, exact attention, like being read by something that operated in a language adjacent to magic but not identical to it. The Stormborn thread in his chest responded with recognition, the way it had responded to Apollon and Fleur, that resonance frequency thing that was not magical attraction but blood memory. After about 2 minutes, Sylvain lowered her hands. "It is there," she said. "Latent. Partially aware. It has been drawing on your energy in a very small way for the entirety of your life, not enough that a standard assessment would flag it as anything but the scar itself, but enough that over 10 years it has become," she thought about her word. "Settled in. Like a splinter that the body has grown tissue around. Can you remove it?" "Yes. I have done similar work twice before, for objects rather than living hosts, but the principle is the same." She was already opening her case. "The complication is that removing it will likely cause a response. The fragment will not want to leave. It's a piece of soul," Harry said. "It doesn't have wants. Fragments of powerful, violently severed souls have residual volition," Sylvain said, with the matter-of-fact tone of someone who had learned this empirically. "Not true volition. Not intelligence. But, instinct. It will resist." "How?" "It will attempt to reinforce the connection. Emotionally, you may feel strong emotions that aren't yours. Pain, possibly. Fear, more likely. It will try to make you feel that losing it is losing something important." She met his eyes. "It will not succeed if you know it's happening. Now I know it's happening." "Exactly." She arranged several things on the table with precise economy. "Fleur will anchor. This is Veela soul work, I need her resonance as a counterpoint to the fragment signature. It helps establish what belongs and what doesn't." Fleur came forward. She looked at Harry with that assessing look, and underneath it something more direct, concern, genuine and not concealed. "Tell me if something feels wrong," she said. "Something is wrong," Harry said. "That's why we're doing this." Her mouth curved. "You know what I mean." "I know." The removal took the better part of 2 hours. Harry sat in the garden chair with Sylvain working at his forehead and Fleur standing at his right shoulder, her hand not touching him but close, the warmth of her Veela magic a steady counterpressure to everything Sylvain was doing. It was not pleasant. It was not what Harry would call painful, it was something more specific than pain, like having something that had been embedded for 10 years gently but insistently dislodged, each increment of removal producing a resistance that expressed itself as a wave of emotion rather than physical sensation. The first wave was grief, sudden and total and not his, a rush of something that tasted like loss and desperation, dark and cold and nothing to do with anything Harry had ever felt personally. He recognized it wasn't his. He breathed through it. The second wave was worse, fear. Not the ordinary fear of immediate danger but a deep, sourceless terror that seemed to come from the ground up, a drowning kind of panic that had no object and no logic, and he understood viscerally what Sylvain had meant about the fragment trying to make him feel that losing it was losing something important. His hands tightened on the chair arms. "Still with me?" Fleur's voice, steady and close. "Yes," Harry said. "The emotions are not yours." "I know." His voice was even. "Keep going." The third wave didn't come. Instead, there was a sound, not audible exactly, more like something in the register below hearing, and a sensation of something separating cleanly, like a thread pulled free from fabric. His forehead ached sharply, once. And then the scar, for the first time in 10 years, was simply a scar. Just tissue. Just an old wound. The warmth of the Stormborn magic in his chest expanded into the space where the fragment had been, filling it, and Harry opened his eyes and the garden looked different in a way he couldn't explain, brighter, or more detailed, or possibly just fully visible for the first time. Sylvain was putting something in a containment vessel with very careful hands. The vessel sealed with a click that sounded final. "Done," she said. "The fragment is contained. It will need to be destroyed. I recommend the deepest Gringotts fire, which Ragnarok can arrange." Harry touched his scar. "Just skin. How do you feel?" Fleur asked. She was watching him carefully. "Like I've been wearing someone else's coat for 10 years and just took it off," Harry said. He looked at her. "Thank you. Both of you." Sylvain inclined her head with a professional nod. Fleur just looked at him, and whatever was happening in her expression was more complicated than professional, but she folded it away efficiently before he could name it. "The ceremony is in 4 days," she said. "I know." Harry stretched his hands, feeling the Stormborn thread hum cleanly, nothing foreign in the signal anymore. "I'll be ready." "Are you not worried?" she asked. "About the ministry? About Dumbledore?" Harry considered the question. 3 days ago he'd been sleeping in a cupboard under the stairs, cooking breakfast for people who treated him as an inconvenience, and carrying 91 magical bindings and a piece of dark wizard he didn't know about. Now he was sitting in his family's garden, free, with allies he hadn't had yesterday, and a very clear picture of who had done what to him and why. "No," he said simply. Fleur searched his face. "You are not pretending to be calm." "No. I'm actually calm." He looked at her. "Do you want to know why?" She waited. "Because Dumbledore and the Ministry have been making decisions about me for 10 years based on the assumption that I couldn't handle knowing what I was," Harry said. "That assumption was always wrong. It's just even more wrong now." He stood up from the chair and the Stormborn magic moved with him, easy and natural, the ozone quality already rising in the air. "They built their strategy around something I'm not." He looked at the far end of the garden where the old walls stood, rebuilt and correct. "Now they have to deal with what I actually am." Fleur followed his gaze. Then she looked back at him with an expression that had stopped calculating and started arriving at something else. "Yes," she said. "They do." Late that evening, after Sylvain had left and Fleur had stayed for dinner, less formal than the afternoon tea, Tippy going slightly overboard with the meal in the way of someone who had deeply missed cooking for people, Harry sat on the back steps of the manor while the sky darkened over the oak wood, and wrote 2 letters. The first was to Ragnarok, asking him to arrange the destruction of the containment vessel and updating him on the ministry letter. He also asked about the 6 ancient Stormborn bindings and who might have placed them. He signed it with his full name because Ragnarok's office seemed to prefer formality. The second letter took longer. It was addressed to Albus Dumbledore. He wrote 3 drafts before he settled on the final version, which was brief, exactly 5 sentences. The first told Dumbledore that the inheritance assessment had been completed. The second told him that all 91 bindings had been removed, and that the documentation of their origins was in his possession. The third invited him to come to Potter Manor at his earliest convenience for a conversation. The fourth specified that the conversation would be between the 2 of them, without ministry involvement, because Harry was willing to listen to whatever Dumbledore thought needed saying before he decided what to do next. The 5th sentence was simply, "I think you owe me an explanation. I am giving you the chance to provide one." He sealed it and gave it to the Potter family owl, a large and competent bird named Arrow who lived in the manor's Ollery and had clearly been very bored for 9 years. He watched Arrow fly off into the dark and thought that the next few days were going to be interesting. Behind him, through the kitchen window, he could hear Fleur and Tippy engaged in some kind of friendly disagreement about whether the dishes should be done by hand or by magic, Fleur's French-accented English rising and falling with amusement. He listened to it for a moment. Then he went back inside. Chapter 3, The Reckoning. Dumbledore arrived 2 days later, at 9 in the morning, exactly when Harry had expected him. Not because Harry had arranged it for 9, he hadn't specified a time in the letter. But men like Dumbledore arrived at 9 because 9 was reasonable and controlled and implied that they had slept well and eaten breakfast and were approaching the meeting from a position of settled authority. Harry had worked this out from watching Vernon Dursley, who arrived at his study every Saturday at 9 to go through the household accounts, and the principal transferred. When powerful men wanted to project calm, they came in the morning. Harry was in the garden when the ward alarm hummed, and he took his time walking around to the front. Not rudely, he wasn't interested in cheap power plays, but because he'd been in the middle of something and he finished it first. By the time he came around the side of the house, Dumbledore was standing at the gate, and Harry had his first clear look at the most powerful wizard in Britain. He was taller than Harry had imagined from Mrs. Figg's photograph. The silver beard was real, and the half-moon spectacles were real, and the robes were a rich midnight blue that probably cost more than the Dursley's car. He carried a wand loosely in one hand, not threateningly, just naturally, the way people carried things they'd had for long enough that they were unconscious about it. And he was watching Harry come around the corner of the house with an expression of profound, complex attention, something moving behind the blue eyes that was too careful to read at this distance. Harry opened the gate. "Harry," Dumbledore said, with warmth that sounded entirely genuine. Maybe it was. That was the complicated part. "Professor Dumbledore," Harry said. "Come in." He took him to the study. Not the sitting room where he'd talked with Fleur, with its comfortable settee and good light, but the study, the room with the desk and the floor-to-ceiling shelves and the 2 chairs that faced each other across a space of deliberate formality. He'd moved his father's papers to the side. The Gringotts folder sat on the desk. Dumbledore took in the room as he entered it. His eyes went to the folder, then to the shelves, then back to Harry, who had sat in the chair behind the desk without thinking much about it and then decided not to move because that would be overthinking. "You've made yourself at home," Dumbledore said, sitting in the opposite chair with the easy manner of a man who made himself at home everywhere. "It is my home," Harry said. A brief pause. Dumbledore looked at him. Really looked, past the 10-year-old, past the new robes, with that calibrating attention of a man who had lived for over a century and knew what things were supposed to feel like and was registering that this felt different. "Of course," he said. "It is. Do you want tea?" "That would be lovely." Harry called for Tippy, who appeared, took the order, and disappeared with a suspicious degree of dignity that Harry recognized as the elf equivalent of very strong feelings being kept politely under control. Tippy had strong opinions about what had been done to Harry, which she expressed through the quality of her service rather than directly, which Harry found genuinely touching. While they waited, neither of them spoke. Harry sat with the silence comfortably. Dumbledore held it with the practiced ease of someone who had conducted more difficult conversations than this, which was true, and the slight advantage of experience, which Harry granted him. "You received my letter," Harry said, when the tea arrived. "I did." Dumbledore poured with the automatic grace of long habit. "Your writing is quite direct for someone your age." "I've had a lot of practice thinking clearly," Harry said. "It turns out suppressing someone's magic doesn't suppress how they think." Dumbledore set the teapot down. "No," he said quietly. "I suppose it doesn't." Harry opened the Gringotts folder and slid it across the desk. Not open to any particular page, the whole thing, face down, an invitation rather than an accusation. Dumbledore looked at it for a moment, then looked at Harry. "How much do you know?" he asked. 34 bindings with your signature," Harry said. "First placed August 1st, 1981. Last placed November 1990. I know when, I know how deep, and I know what each category was suppressing." He paused. "What I don't know is why." The word why settled between them like something substantial. Dumbledore picked up the folder. He opened it. He read without speaking for several minutes, and Harry watched him read, and what he saw in the old man's face was not defensiveness and not guilt exactly, it was something more like the expression of a man reading a record of his own decisions and finding them smaller and more damaging on paper than they had seemed in the moment of making them. When he closed the folder, he set it back on the desk and looked at Harry for a long time before speaking. "I will not insult you by pretending this is not what it appears to be," Dumbledore said. His voice had lost the warmth and become something more direct, something Harry respected more, actually, for its honesty. "I placed those bindings. I intended to place them. I know. I want to tell you why. That's why I invited you here," Harry said. Dumbledore looked at his tea. Then at the shelves behind Harry. Then at Harry himself, and there was something in his face now that was not comfortable, a man encountering the full weight of a thing he'd been carrying for 10 years and finding it heavier than he'd remembered because now someone else could see it clearly. "When Voldemort killed your parents," he began, "the magic that protected you, your mother's sacrifice, it created something that no one had seen before. A protection that required a blood anchor, a living vessel of your mother's blood, to sustain itself. That was why I placed you with your aunt. Unpleasant as that arrangement was." He paused. "But the night your parents died, something else happened. The curse rebounded. Voldemort's body was destroyed. And in the process, something of his power, some residue, transferred to you." "The soul fragment," Harry said. Dumbledore's eyes sharpened. "You know about that. It's been removed." A longer pause. Something moved through Dumbledore's expression, surprise, and then a rapid recalculation, and then something that Harry thought might have been fear, though it was very controlled. "Removed," he repeated. 3 days ago. Veela Soul Worker. It's in a containment vessel on its way to Gringotts to be destroyed." Harry watched him. "Was that one of the things you were managing? The fragment?" "Yes." Dumbledore said it simply, without deflection. "The fragment was the reason I placed the first bindings. I believed, and the evidence supported this, that your magical development and the fragment's growth were in tension. That if your power developed freely, the fragment would develop with it. Feed from it." He set down his cup. "I believed I was choosing between your power and your survival." "That's the first 9 years," Harry said. "What about November 1990? The last binding. The fragment didn't suddenly grow in November 1990. So what was that one for?" Dumbledore was quiet. "Professor. You were beginning to demonstrate abilities that the Ministry would have found," he stopped. "Threatening," Harry said. "Difficult to contain." "Yes." Harry looked at him steadily. "So the last binding wasn't about the fragment. It was about keeping me manageable." Dumbledore did not look away. He held Harry's gaze, and what Harry saw there was not a villain, nothing so straightforward. It was a man who had made decisions he believed were right and was now, across the desk from the consequence of those decisions, arriving at the uncomfortable knowledge that being right about the danger did not make him right about the solution. "I was afraid," Dumbledore said. "Not of you. Never of you personally. But of what the world would do to you if they saw your full power at 10 years old. Voldemort may be gone, but his followers are not. The Ministry is not. There are people who would have used you, consumed you, destroyed you for what you are. I thought, if you were smaller, you would be safer. You thought if I didn't know what I was," Harry said, "I couldn't make choices you didn't control." The silence that followed was complete. Dumbledore closed his eyes for a moment. Opened them. He looked older, Harry thought, not physically, but in the way that people look when they stop holding something up. "Yes," he said. "I think that is more accurate than my framing." Harry picked up his tea. He took a slow sip. He put the cup down. "I'm not going to destroy your reputation," he said. "I'm not going to bring this to the Prophet or the Wizengamot tomorrow morning. That's not what this conversation is." He looked at Dumbledore directly. "But I am also not going to pretend it didn't happen, or let you put anything back. If you approach me with a binding, with a restriction, with any arrangement that hasn't gone through me and Gringotts, I will make the folder public the same day. Do you understand me? Dumbledore looked at him. You are 10 years old, he said slowly, but it wasn't disbelief, it was something closer to wonder. 34 bindings worth of 10 years old, Harry said. Another silence. Then, surprisingly, the corner of Dumbledore's mouth moved. Not a full smile, but the acknowledgement of one. Your father would have, he stopped. Shook his head. Yes. I understand you. Good. Harry leaned back in the chair. Now. The prophecy. Dumbledore's expression shifted completely. You know about that too, he said. I know there is one. I know it involves me and Voldemort. I know it exists because otherwise you'd have had no reason to keep me alive and manageable versus simply kept away. Harry watched him. Tell me what it says. He told him. All of it. The full prophecy, the one with the power to vanquish the Dark Lord approaches, born to those who have thrice defied him, born as the 7th month dies, and the rest, which Harry noted carefully. A mark. Neither can live while the other survives. Dumbledore recited it from memory in the way of someone who had carried it for 11 years, and Harry listened without interrupting until the end. Neville Longbottom also fits the first criteria, Harry said, when Dumbledore finished. He does. Yes. But Voldemort chose me. He chose you. Which by the terms of the prophecy, made it about me. Yes. Harry looked at the middle distance for a moment. So when he comes back, if he comes back. He will. Harry said it with the flat certainty of someone who had felt the fragment from the inside for 10 years, who knew what that level of will and hunger felt like, even through 10 years of binding. He will. But he'll be slower now without the fragment. He looked at Dumbledore. Because the fragment was a piece of his soul he'd split off. Destroying it weakens him. Dumbledore was very still. You know about Horcruxes. I do now, Harry said. Is there more than one? The way Dumbledore's expression changed told Harry the answer before the words came. I believe so. I have not yet confirmed, so we find them, Harry said. And we destroy them. All of them. Before he can return properly. Harry, I'm not asking your permission. Harry's voice was even, not aggressive. Simply clear. I'm telling you what I'm going to do. You can help, which would be more efficient, or not help, which would be less efficient but would still end the same way. He paused. Your choice. Dumbledore sat back in his chair and looked at the boy across the desk from him, the thin face, the messy hair, the green eyes that had no fear in them, not of him, not of the future, not of anything he'd said. He looked at him for a long moment. You're going through with the Veela recognition, he said. It wasn't a question. In 3 days. Yes. The Ministry cannot legally prevent it. Ragnarok has been very clear about this. Cornelius will try. I imagine he will, Harry said. What does Fudge actually want? Specifically. Dumbledore seemed to weigh something, then decided on honesty. Fudge is afraid of any power center outside his control. The Veela Nation recognizing a British child as a foreign sovereign removes that child from British legal jurisdiction in several important ways. He will see it as a challenge to Ministry authority. It is a challenge to Ministry authority. Yes. A pause. He may come here today. His people will have been watching Gringotts since the assessment flagged. I know. Harry looked at the clock on the study wall. He's about 40 minutes late, actually. I thought he'd come before you. Dumbledore blinked. Then he laughed, a genuine laugh, short and surprised and nothing performed about it, and for a moment Harry saw through the long careful management and the weight of wrong decisions to the man underneath, who was not monstrous, was genuinely funny, was genuinely brilliant, and had made genuinely terrible choices, and all of those things were true simultaneously. You invited him as well, Dumbledore said. I sent a letter to the ministry saying I was available for a courtesy conversation before the ceremony. Harry straightened his robes. I didn't invite him specifically. But he'll have intercepted anything addressed to the ministry regarding me. Dumbledore looked at him. You wanted us both here at the same time. It's more efficient, Harry said. You wanted to see how we interact. That too, Harry admitted. The ward alarm hummed. Cornelius Fudge arrived with 2 Aurors and an undersecretary, which told Harry several things immediately. The Aurors were procedural intimidation, a signal of official weight, not an actual threat. The undersecretary was for documentation. Fudge wanted a record of this conversation, which meant he was already thinking about how to use it rather than what it was for, which told Harry everything he needed to know about Fudge's priorities. Harry had Tippy show them to the sitting room and made them wait 6 minutes before he came in. Not rudeness, he changed into slightly better robes because he felt like it, and he brought Dumbledore with him, because he wanted to see how Fudge reacted to finding the 2 of them together. The reaction was instructive. Fudge was a wide man in lime green robes with the broad, pink-faced manner of a career politician who had risen through backslapping rather than intelligence. He looked at Harry the way men who underestimate things look at things, quickly, mapping it to a category, moving on. He looked at Dumbledore with slightly more care and a flicker of something that wasn't quite resentment and wasn't quite reassurance. Mr. Potter, Fudge said, with the automatic warmth of someone who had been in politics long enough to make warmth reflexive. What a pleasure. I'm Cornelius Fudge, Minister for Magic. He extended his hand. Harry shook it. Good morning, Minister. Albus. He said it deliberately, first name, to Dumbledore, in front of Fudge. The flicker of reassurance in Fudge's face curdled very slightly. They sat. The Auror stood by the door. The undersecretary had a quick notes quill that was already scratching. I'll be direct, Fudge said, leaning forward with his elbows on his knees in a way that was meant to signal openness and instead suggested he'd rehearsed this. The ministry has received notification from Gringotts of an inheritance assessment conducted on your behalf 2 days ago. We have serious concerns about the assessment's findings, and, which findings specifically? Harry asked. Fudge blinked. He'd been building towards something and Harry had cut into the middle of it, and he didn't fully recover his rhythm. Well, all of them, frankly. An inheritance assessment of this scope, conducted on a minor without ministry oversight, the ancient pacts supersede ministry oversight in inheritance matters, Harry said. Ragnarok explained this in his formal notification to your office. Did you read it? The ministry's legal position is that the ancient pacts require, Minister. Harry's voice didn't rise. Did you read it? A pause. The undersecretary's quill scratched. Fudge's face had taken on a slightly pinkier color. The relevant passages, yes. Then you know the ministry has no jurisdiction over the assessment's findings. Harry looked at him with the polite steadiness of someone who has done the reading. What I suspect you're actually concerned about is the Veela recognition ceremony. So let's talk about that. Fudge glanced at Dumbledore, who said nothing. The recognition ceremony, Fudge said carefully, raises significant questions about the governance of British magical citizens who hold foreign sovereign titles. The ministry has a responsibility to what? Harry asked. To ensure that British wizarding citizens are not subject to conflicting obligations. Dual sovereignty. Harry tilted his head. Minister, I'm 10 years old. I don't have obligations yet. I have a bloodline recognition that is being formally acknowledged. The Veela Nation isn't asking me to govern anything tomorrow. The ceremony is a recognition of heritage and blood right, which the ministry has no authority to prevent. He paused. Unless you're planning to argue that British wizards don't have the right to recognize their own heritage. That would be an interesting position, given that the ministry celebrates heritage ceremonies every year. The undersecretary's quill had slowed. Dumbledore was looking at his hands. Fudge tried a different approach. There is also the question of your guardianship. Your aunt and uncle were not notified of the assessment because the ancient pacts don't require notification of non-magical custodians, Harry said. They also did not provide adequate care, which I suspect you'll find documented in Gringotts records if you ask the right questions. He watched Fudge's face. I'm not going back there. Mr. Potter, you are a minor and the Ministry has a duty to protect me. Harry's voice was still even. He picked up his tea. The way you protected me for the past 9 years. Silence. The quick notes quill had stopped entirely. Fudge's face had gone from pink to something approaching the color of undercooked salmon, and he looked at Dumbledore again with the expression of a man who has walked into something and is looking for a collaborator. Dumbledore did not look back. The Ministry placed several of the bindings in that folder, Harry said, conversationally. I'm not bringing that up as a threat right now. I'm bringing it up as context, so that you understand why I'm not particularly moved by the Ministry's expressed concern for my welfare. He set his cup down. If the Ministry wants a productive relationship with me, I am open to that. I'm not interested in burning things down for no reason. But that relationship has to start from an honest place, which means you acknowledging that what was done to me was wrong and that it stops now. Not managed, not contained. Stops. Fudge stared at him. You're 10, he said. It came out almost involuntary. Everyone keeps saying that, Harry said. I'm beginning to think it's meant to be reassuring for the person saying it rather than informative for me. From beside him, barely audible, Dumbledore made a sound that was almost certainly suppressed laughter. Fudge stood. The political instinct had kicked back in and he was retreating into formality because formality, for people like Fudge, was armor. The Ministry will review the documentation and respond through official channels, he said, which was the political equivalent of we'll see about that. I want you to know, Mr. Potter, that whatever your current situation, the Ministry is here to support you. Thank you, Minister, Harry said. He stood too, which put him a head shorter than Fudge, but he looked up at him with perfect equanimity. I'll remember that. Fudge left. The Aurors went with him. The Undersecretary went last, Quill still scratching something, and Harry waited until the ward alarm registered their departure before he sat back down. He'll go straight to his lawyers, Dumbledore said. I know. So will I. Harry looked at him. Yours is better. Dumbledore raised an eyebrow. I want your help, Harry said. On my terms. Not because I need someone to fight for me, but because you know things about this political landscape that I don't yet, and you have relationships I don't have, and the most efficient use of everyone's time is if we are pointed in the same direction. He paused. Which means you have to decide if you can work with me rather than for me. If you can't, I'd rather know now. Dumbledore was quiet for a long moment. The study was warm, the morning light moving through the windows, and outside the garden was doing its particular brand of old-established peace that the rest of the past 2 days had no access to. I owe you more than I can repay, Dumbledore said finally. Not heavily, simply. The way people state facts they have fully arrived at. Then start with information about the other Horcruxes, Harry said. They talked for 3 hours. Dumbledore knew, or suspected, for additional Horcruxes beyond the fragment that had been removed, a locket once belonging to Salazar Slytherin, a cup once belonging to Helga Hufflepuff, a diadem once belonging to Rowena Ravenclaw, and a diary. He had no confirmed locations for most of them, but he had threads, and he laid them out with the careful, methodical clarity of a man who had been assembling this picture for years in private and had never had someone to lay it out for. Harry listened and took notes in the margins of a fresh piece of parchment with the same focused precision he brought to everything, asking questions that made Dumbledore occasionally pause and recalibrate. The diary, Dumbledore suspected, had passed through Lucius Malfoy's hands at some point. The locket had been in the Black family home. The Ravenclaw diadem had been lost for centuries but was likely still in Britain. I know someone connected to the Malfoy family, Harry said, when they got to the diary. Dumbledore looked at him. Narcissa? I was going to say yes, but you clearly already know. She contacted Gringotts the day after the assessment, Dumbledore said. A debt, apparently. The Stormborn debt. Yes. She's coming tomorrow. Dumbledore's expression moved through several things at once. Harry, the Malfoys are not, Narcissa Malfoy is not Lucius Malfoy, Harry said. And the debt is real. I checked. Ragnarok confirmed it. He looked at Dumbledore steadily. I'm not naive about what the Malfoy family is. But I'm also not going to refuse a legitimate ally because of who she's married to. That would be sloppy. Dumbledore looked at him for a moment. When you said you wanted to work with me rather than for you, he said slowly, I want to ensure I fully understand the distinction. It means I make the decisions, Harry said. You advise. You inform. You help where you can. But the choices are mine. He held Dumbledore's gaze. That's not arrogance. That's the only arrangement I can trust, given where we're starting from. A long silence. Then Dumbledore nodded. A real nod, the kind that meant something had been decided rather than the kind that meant conversation was continuing. All right, he said. Good. Harry stood. I'll need you at the ceremony. Officially present, officially supportive. The ministry is less likely to make a scene if you're standing there. I will be there. And if Fudge goes to the papers before the ceremony, I will manage that, Dumbledore said, and he said it with the quiet authority of someone for whom managing things was as natural as breathing, and Harry decided that this, specifically, was a thing he could use. One more thing, Harry said. Dumbledore waited. The Blood Wards. At Privet Drive. They're still running, technically, because I haven't formally broken the blood anchor. If I do that, if I terminate the protection, my aunt is exposed. She's not a good person, but she's still my mother's sister. He paused. Can the ward be transferred to this property? Dumbledore looked at him for a very long moment. Then very quietly he said, the protection was your mother's love. It goes where you are. Then it's already here, Harry said. Dumbledore stood. He picked up his hat, which he'd set on the edge of the desk when he sat down and which Harry had not thought to mention was slightly on top of his father's Quidditch notes, and he looked around the study one more time. This was your grandfather's room, he said. Your father did his homework in here every holiday. He looked at the shelves. James used to climb those shelves to reach the top row. He broke the third shelf 3 times before his father put a charm on it. Harry looked at the shelves. Thank you, he said. Narcissa Malfoy arrived at 4 o'clock, without announcement, because the gate wards recognized the Stormborn debt marker in her blood and opened for her, which Harry hadn't fully understood until it happened. She came around the side of the house and found him in the garden where he'd returned after Dumbledore left, sitting in the grass with a book from the study's top shelf that he'd reached without climbing, and he looked up and found a tall blonde witch in formal grey robes standing at the garden entrance regarding him with eyes the color of winter sky. She was not warm, exactly. But she was precise, and she was honest in the way sharp things are honest, because they can't afford the waste of pretending to be otherwise. Narcissa Malfoy, she said. I know, Harry said. He closed the book and stood. Come in. She took the same chair Dumbledore had taken, in the same study, which gave Harry the brief wild thought that his father's study had seen more significant conversations in the past 8 hours than it probably had in the past 20 years. He sat behind the desk. She crossed her ankles and folded her hands and looked at him with that precise, calibrating attention and did not look surprised by what she found. Unlike everyone else, Narcissa Malfoy looked exactly as though she had expected this. The Stormborn debt, Harry said. Your grandmother saved my mother's life in 1959, Narcissa said. At significant risk to herself. The debt was formally registered with Gringotts and has been accruing interest for 67 years. She opened the small case she'd brought and set a document on the desk. I have come to call it in. Harry looked at the document. What do you want for it? I want my son removed from certain trajectories, she said. Draco is 11. He has been promised to Voldemort's service since before he could walk, and every path laid out for him by his father leads to one end. Her voice did not waver, but something in it was carefully contained, the way very cold water is contained, under enormous pressure. I want those paths disrupted. Not by me, I have no power to disrupt Lucius without consequences I cannot withstand alone. By you. Harry thought about this. You're asking me to protect your son. I am asking you to give him an alternative, she said. Draco is not a good person yet. He has been raised badly, and he has absorbed what he was raised to absorb. But he is 11. She paused. He has not yet made the choice. I want him to have the choice. Harry looked at her for a long moment. You know what I'm going to do with the Horcrux information. She didn't flinch. She'd known, had probably known the moment she'd decided to come. Lucius has the diary. He has always been a true believer, not a pragmatist. He will not give it up willingly. And if I take it, then he will be destroyed by association. And Draco will need somewhere to go. She met his eyes. I am calling in the debt because I cannot protect my son alone, and because the Stormborn heir is the only power in Britain that can do what needs to be done and might choose to do it mercifully. She paused. Was I wrong? Harry looked at the document. The debt was real, he could feel it in the Stormborn thread, a kind of recognition, like a word he'd forgotten and suddenly remembered. A bond that his grandmother had created and that had been waiting to be honored for 67 years. No, he said. You weren't wrong. He picked up the quill. He signed the debt acknowledgement. Narcissa Malfoy released a breath that was completely controlled and betrayed absolutely everything. She stayed an hour. They talked about Lucius, his movements, his habits, the likely location of the diary, with the careful, factual efficiency of two people who had agreed on a goal and were working backward from it. She also, unprompted, told him which ministry officials were in Voldemort's pocket and which were merely cowards, and the distinction, she made clear, was significant. When she left, Harry stood at the gate and watched her walk away down the lane, her grey robes precise in the late afternoon light. Fleur arrived from the other direction 30 seconds later, apparently having passed Narcissa at the end of the lane, and came through the gate with an expression of barely suppressed curiosity. Was that Narcissa Malfoy? She asked. Yes. What did she want? To protect her son, Harry said. Fleur looked at the lane where Narcissa had turned out of sight. And you helped her. I honored a 67-year-old debt and received very useful information in exchange. Which will help us, the ceremony, and the eventual Horcrux hunt. He looked at her. How's the ceremony coming? She studied him for a moment with that expression that had stopped calculating several conversations ago and was now something else entirely, still unnamed. Then she shook her head, not dismissively, more like clearing space for something she hadn't quite arrived at yet. The venue is confirmed, she said, falling into step beside him as they walked back to the house. Sylvain confirmed the soul work is complete. The Queen's delegation arrives the day after tomorrow. The ceremony is the day after that. She paused. Dumbledore has sent word that he'll be present. My mother is dealing with the ministry's formal objection, which was delivered this morning and is, as predicted, entirely without legal basis. Good. Harry held the front door open. The manor was warm inside, and it smelled like whatever Tippy was making for dinner. 3 days. Fleur stepped past him into the house, and the warm light caught her silver gold hair, and for a moment she was something that existed between the ordinary world and the older one. The Stormborn thread in Harry's chest recognized instinctively, and then she turned to look at him and was just Fleur again, which was strange to him because just Fleur was already remarkable. Are you ready? She asked. For which part? All of it. Harry considered this. He thought about the morning, Dumbledore across the desk, the weight of 34 bindings finally acknowledged. Fudge backing down from a 10-year-old in his own sitting room. Narcissa Malfoy calling in a 67-year debt because she had no one else to trust. The Horcrux list. The ceremony in 3 days. The Ministry's objection. The whole unfolding machinery of a world that had kept him small suddenly having to deal with the fact that it hadn't worked. Yes, he said. And meant it completely. Chapter 4, The Crowning the Queen arrived on a Thursday morning in a rainstorm that nobody had forecast. Not violent rain, nothing dramatic about the weather itself. Just a steady, purposeful downpour that started at precisely 7 o'clock and showed no intention of stopping, as though the sky had decided to be present for the occasion and was choosing the most dignified method available. Harry stood at the manor's front window with his tea and watched the lane fill with silver light and moving water and thought that the Veela Nation had a different relationship with weather than ordinary people did. Fleur came downstairs at 7:30 and stood beside him at the window. She'd been at the manor for 2 days now, not staying over, but arriving early and leaving late, the preparation for the ceremony pulling longer and longer hours. Her mother had set up a working base at the Leaky Cauldron with the advance members of the delegation, and the formalities had been passing back and forth between there and Potter Manor in a steady stream of formal correspondence that Tippy was managing with fierce organizational pride. "She's already in the city," Fleur said, looking at the rain. "I know." Harry could feel it, a resonance in the Stormborn thread that had been building since yesterday, a kind of long-range recognition, like a tuning fork responding to another tuning fork several rooms away. Fleur glanced at him sideways. "You can feel her arrival through the bloodline connection. Is that what it is? The Stormborn bond with the Veela Nation runs in both directions. The Queen will feel it too, that you're here, that you're real, that the binding is clean." She paused. "She has been waiting for this since before I was born." Harry looked at the rain. "What's she like?" Fleur was quiet for a moment in a way that told him she was choosing carefully. "She is not warm. Not the way my mother is warm. She is very old, and very certain, and she has carried the weight of this expectation for a long time. It has made her precise." She paused again. "She will test you." "How?" "By being herself." Fleur almost smiled. "That is test enough." The Queen came to the manor at 10, which Harry had not expected. He'd assumed the first formal meeting would be at the ceremony venue. But Apollon arrived first, at 9:30, with 2 members of the delegation in formal white robes, and explained with her careful diplomat's precision that the Queen wished a private audience before the public ceremony. This was, Apollon said, unusual. The implication was clear. It was unusual because the Queen did not make private visits lightly, and the fact that she was making one told Harry something about how seriously the Veela Nation was taking this. He had Tippy prepare the sitting room, not the study, which was for working, but the front room with the good light and the deep window seats, which felt right for this, and he changed into robes he'd bought 2 days ago in Diagon Alley, dark green with silver detailing that Fleur had helped him choose and that were, she had confirmed with the professional certainty of someone who cared about these things, entirely appropriate for a formal meeting of this nature. He was tying the last fastening when he heard the gate. Queen Seraphine of the Veela Nation was not what Harry had built in his mind from other people's descriptions. He had assembled something combining Apollon's authority with Sylvain's precision and the general Veela quality that he'd been learning to read, and the woman who came through his front door was all of these things and none of them. She was older than Apollon, older than Harry could date with any confidence, which was to say probably quite old indeed, with white gold hair arranged without fuss and eyes the deep amber of old honey, and she moved through the manor's entrance hall as though she had already measured every room and decided where things belonged. She stopped when she saw Harry. He was standing at the sitting room door, not waiting formally, just there, because it was his house and he'd been walking through it when the gate opened. She looked at him with those amber eyes, and he looked back at her, and for about 4 seconds neither of them spoke. Then the Queen said something in the old tongue, the Veela language, which Harry didn't speak, and her voice was low and even, and whatever she said made both of her attendants go very still. She says, Fleur translated quietly from behind him, the instruments were correct. Tell her, Harry said, that I don't doubt it. Fleur translated. The Queen's eyes moved, something in them shifting, recalibrating, like everyone did, except hers did it differently. Not surprise, not adjustment. More like the final placement of something she'd been holding in a provisional position for a long time. Come, Harry said, and held the sitting room door open. They talked for an hour, with Fleur translating. The Queen's English was functional, but she preferred her own language for significant conversations, which Harry filed as both a cultural note and a useful piece of information about how she defined significance. He found himself watching her as much as listening, reading what her face and posture and the quality of her silences said, which was often more than the translated words. She asked him about the bindings, specifically the Stormborn ones, the 6 ancient suppressions that had been woven into his blood. She did not look surprised when he described them. You knew about those, Harry said. Fleur translated his words. The Queen answered. She says the ancient bindings were placed by the Stormborn family themselves, Fleur said. Not enemies. The Stormborn heir of that generation, 300 years ago, bound the line in her children because she was afraid. The power had grown too visible. Too many people were coming for it. Fleur paused. She says your ancestor chose diminishment over extinction. She says the Queen has always believed it was the wrong choice, but she has never been the one being hunted. Harry sat with that. The original binding had been a mother's fear. All the others had built on top of it, Dumbledore, the Ministry, Voldemort, stacking their own suppressions on top of what was already there, because the foundation had already been laid. The first act of suppression had made all the subsequent ones possible. What does she want from me? Harry asked. Not the ceremony, not the recognition, after that. What does the Veela Nation actually want? The Queen answered without waiting for Fleur to finish translating the question, as though she'd been expecting it. Alliance, Fleur said. True alliance. Not the kind that is trading posts and trade agreements and formal letters exchanged at intervals. The kind that was meant to exist between the Stormborn line and the nation from the beginning. A genuine partnership. She paused. She says the nation has been isolated from British wizarding politics for 2 centuries. She says it has made them weaker than they should be, and Britain weaker than it needs to be, and that Voldemort's rise happened partly because no one who could have stopped it sooner had the connections that would have let them see it in time. Harry nodded slowly. Tell her I think she's right. And tell her the alliance she's describing is what I want too. He paused. But tell her it has to be genuine in both directions. The nation gets access to British political channels. Britain gets access to the nation's knowledge and networks. Nobody uses the other as a tool. Fleur translated. The Queen listened, and then she smiled, not warmly, not coldly, but with the specific satisfaction of someone who has received the answer they were looking for. She said one more thing. She says, Fleur said quietly, your grandmother would be very satisfied. Harry looked at the Queen. Tell her I hope to meet her standard. The ceremony venue was the Leaky Cauldron's rear courtyard, which in ordinary circumstances led to the brick wall entrance of Diagon Alley but had been closed to regular traffic for the afternoon with the landlord's aggressive cooperation and a set of notice-me-not charms that Apollin's team had erected the previous day. The courtyard was not enormous. It held, comfortably, about 50 people, and they were there, the full Veela delegation, 40 strong, in white formal robes that caught what little afternoon light was making it through the continuing rain. Dumbledore stood to one side with his midnight blue robes and his silver beard and the deliberate, present calm he'd worn since their study conversation. Narcissa Malfoy stood on the other side of the courtyard, alone, wearing grey so pale it was almost white, and she did not speak to anyone and didn't need to. Ragnarok was there. Harry had not known Ragnarok would come, and he stopped when he saw the goblin standing near the entrance in formal attire, which was apparently a red sash over dark clothing, carrying a document case. Ragnarok met his eyes and inclined his head. You didn't have to come, Harry said. The pact is being fulfilled, Ragnock said. This office should be represented. Thank you. Stop thanking me. You'll embarrass us both. But the amber eyes were warmer than usual. Fleur materialized at Harry's shoulder. She'd changed into white, formal emissary robes, the Delacour crest at the collar, and she looked like a person who had been built for exactly this kind of day, which he supposed she had, in a way. She handed him a small card with the phonetic pronunciation of the 3 sentences he'd need to say in the old tongue. Your pronunciation will not be perfect, she said. I know. The magic doesn't require perfect pronunciation. It requires sincerity. I have that in abundance, Harry said. She looked at him for a moment with that unnamed expression that lived in the general territory of I am revising my initial assessment and said, yes. You do. The ceremony itself was shorter than Harry had expected. He had imagined something elaborate, rituals, chanting, extended incantations. The Veela way, he was learning, was the opposite. They valued precision over spectacle. What needed to happen was made to happen clearly and without excess. The Queen stood in the center of the courtyard. Harry stood 10 feet away, facing her. The 40 members of the delegation arranged themselves in a loose circle, not surrounding so much as witnessing, which was a different quality of presence. Apollon stood slightly behind the Queen. Fleur stood slightly behind Harry, which she told him was the emissary's position during the recognition, present as the intermediary, the translator between worlds. The rain fell quietly around the courtyard's edges, held back from the ceremony space by a gentle repelling charm that Apollon had placed earlier, so the ceremony itself was dry while the city went on being wet around it. The Queen spoke in the old tongue. A statement. Harry caught the name Stormborn and the word that Fleur had taught him meant acknowledgement and a longer phrase he couldn't parse but that the Stormborn thread responded to with a warmth that was not metaphorical, a genuine physical sensation in his chest, the bloodline magic hearing itself named in the language it had been dormant in for 300 years. The delegation responded together, a single syllable that sounded like a door being unlocked. Then the Queen looked at Harry, and this was his part. He looked at the card. He looked at her. He put the card in his pocket. He said the 3 sentences from memory, because he'd spent 2 hours the previous night working out what they meant and he'd decided that saying something he understood was more honest than reading something he didn't. His pronunciation was not perfect. It was better than Fleur had expected, because she'd told him it needed to be sincere and sincerity had made him careful. The Queen's amber eyes moved. Then the magic happened. It was not a light show. It was not an explosion. It was the Stormborn thread in Harry's chest moving outward, expanding, the way it had expanded when the bindings came off in Gringotts, but differently, with direction and purpose, reaching across the courtyard toward the Queen, and the Queen's own Veela power extending to meet it, and for a moment they were the same thing, the same ancient compact renewed, bloodline recognition in its purest and oldest form. Harry felt every person in the delegation's presence as a warm point of contact, 40 presences, distinct and individual, oriented toward him not in submission but in the specific alignment of people who have been waiting for a thing to be true and are feeling it become true. He felt the Queen's power as something oceanic, deep and structured and ancient in a way that made even the Peveril thread feel recent. And he felt, briefly, something that was not magic at all but was perhaps what magic was built from, a kind of rightness that didn't need explaining. The Queen spoke one final phrase. Fleur's voice behind him, steady and quiet, she says, I recognize you. The nation recognizes you. The compact is renewed. Harry inclined his head. The delegation said the unlocking sound again. And that was it. 53 people in a rain-surrounded courtyard in London, and 300 years of dormancy ending without a sound. The celebration was less formal. The Leaky Cauldron's back room had been opened, and the delegation drifted there in 2s and 3s, and Tom the landlord was practically incandescent with the honor of it, moving between tables with food and drink and the expression of a man whose entire life had been leading to this catering opportunity. Harry moved through the room and talked to people, delegation members, Apollon, Ragnock, who was nursing something that smelled like iron and seemed pleased with himself in a contained, goblin way. Dumbledore found him near the fireplace. "Well done," Dumbledore said quietly. "Did you feel it?" Harry asked. The moment the compact renewed. Everyone in that courtyard felt it. Including those of us without a bloodline connection. Dumbledore looked at him. It was, he paused. Significant. In the old sense of the word. Fudge wasn't here, Harry said. No. He sent an observer. Dumbledore tilted his head toward a slight man in a corner who was being very carefully unnoticed by absolutely everyone. He's already left to file a report. Good, Harry said. Let Fudge read about it. Let him understand that it happened and couldn't be stopped and the world didn't end. He looked at the room. Fudge needs to see that I'm not a threat to the Ministry. I'm a fact the Ministry needs to deal with. There's a difference. You are walking a very precise line, Dumbledore said. I know. I'm 10. If I go too hard, I'm a dangerous unstable child and the Ministry has a legitimate case for intervention. If I go too soft, I lose the ground I've just gained. Harry looked at the fireplace. So I go exactly hard enough to be unmovable, and exactly visible enough that hiding me is no longer an option, and exactly collaborative enough that the people who matter see working with me as better than working against me. Dumbledore was quiet for a moment. Has anyone told you that you think like a politician? I think like someone who spent 10 years in a house where survival required understanding exactly what kind of power each person in the room had and what they would do with it, Harry said, without bitterness. It has some transferable applications. Dumbledore looked at him with that weight behind his eyes that Harry had seen in the study, the weight of someone carrying the knowledge of a choice badly made. He didn't say anything, and Harry didn't need him to. Narcissa materialized at Harry's other elbow with the quiet precision of someone who had been waiting for a gap in the conversation. Lucius knows, she said. Low, direct. Harry turned. About the ceremony? About Gringotts? About the bindings? About, all of it. Her winter sky eyes were controlled but there was something underneath them moving. He came home last night with information from his Ministry contacts. He knows about the debt I called in. She paused. He will act. I don't know how or when, but he will not simply watch this happen. What would he do? Harry asked. He has the diary, she said. He might use it. Not to restore Voldemort, not yet, not without more preparation, but to demonstrate loyalty to whatever is left of the old network. To prove that the emergence of the Stormborn heir hasn't broken all the old structures. She looked at him steadily. He might use it to put something in motion that creates chaos you'd have to manage. Where's Draco? Harry asked. Narcissa blinked. It was the smallest blink. At home. Is he safe there tonight? She held his gaze for a moment. Yes. For tonight. Then we don't rush, Harry said. Rushing creates mistakes. We know where Lucius is, we know where the diary is, and we know what he's likely to do. That's more information than he has about us. He looked at her. Go home. Don't let him know you were here. If he asks about the ceremony, you heard about it afterward like everyone else. We need him where we can find him. Narcissa studied him for a long moment. You are remarkably calm about all of this. I keep hearing that. It is remarkable because most people faced with, she stopped. With Lucius Malfoy as an active threat. Harry looked at her mildly. I've been facing threats since I was born. He's just the first one who doesn't have 91 bindings worth of advantage over me. Narcissa Malfoy looked at him with those winter sky eyes for a moment, and then she did something unexpected. She put one hand on his shoulder, lightly, briefly, with the formality of someone unaccustomed to the gesture, and said, Do not underestimate him. I won't, Harry said. Don't underestimate me. Her mouth curved by exactly 4 millimeters. She took her hand back. She left. Fleur found him later, when the celebration had gone warm and loose and the formal occasion had dissolved into conversation. She was standing near the courtyard door with a glass of something the delegation apparently brought in quantity, looking at the still falling rain with the slightly faraway quality of someone who is processing something that happened earlier. Harry leaned on the wall beside her. "How do you feel?" she asked. She'd asked him this before, but differently, this time not the emissary asking the sovereign if he was prepared, but something more personal. "Strange," he said honestly. "Not bad strange. Just, I can feel them all. The delegation. Like 40 warm lights somewhere in the back of my awareness. It's not intrusive. But it's new. The sovereign connection," she said. "It will settle. For now it feels like a crowd in a room you didn't know had a room. That's exactly what it feels like." He looked at her. "You knew it would feel like that." "I've studied it." She turned the glass in her hands. "I've spent 6 years studying you, technically. Everything about the Stormborn line, the compact, the prophecy instruments, the binding signatures. Everything the nation had." She paused. "I knew more about you than I knew about most real people. And then you met me." "And then I met you," she agreed. Harry looked at the rain. "Were you disappointed?" She looked at him sharply. "With the difference between the studied version and the actual one," he clarified. She was quiet for a moment. "Then, no. The opposite." She said it simply, without making anything of it. The studied version was a set of bloodlines and a suppressed power signature and a series of historical accounts. The actual version is, she paused. Considerably more interesting. "You mean strange," Harry said. "I mean interesting," she said firmly. "They are not the same thing." Harry almost smiled. The rain fell. The room behind them was warm with conversation and the specific kind of magic that collective relief produces when something long awaited has finally, actually happened. "Lucius Malfoy is going to move soon," Harry said, because the pleasant moment didn't mean the evening was finished with complexity. "I heard," she said. "Narcissa?" "Yes." Fleur set her glass down on the windowsill. "What do you want to do about it?" "I want to get the diary before he can use it." "Which means moving in the next 24 hours. Harry looked at her. "How much do you know about object Horcruxes?" "Enough," she said, immediately, in the tone of someone who has been studying a subject for 6 years and is prepared to be useful. "A Horcrux diary is different from a standard object, it's interactive, which means it has more active defenses than a passive Horcrux. It will resist removal and resist destruction. You need something that destroys its magical anchor completely." "Basilisk venom," Harry said. He'd read the Horcrux section of the Peveril Library the previous evening. The Peveril family had, as it turned out, encountered one of Voldemort's objects before anyone had named them as such, and the notes were detailed. "Or fiend fire," Fleur said. "Or a cursed blade. Basilisk venom is more controlled." Harry thought. "There's a basilisk in Hogwarts." Fleur looked at him. "How do you know that?" "The Peveril Library. Salazar Slytherin documented it when he built the chamber. The Peveril family had an ongoing interest in Slytherin's works." He paused. "I'm not going to Hogwarts in the middle of summer to fight a basilisk." "Obviously not. But the venom itself is available through Gringotts," Harry said. "Ragnarok mentioned that the bank holds various dark creature materials for research and destruction purposes. Basilisk venom being one." He looked toward where Ragnarok was still sitting across the room, looking comfortable in the way goblins looked comfortable when things were going according to plan. "I'll ask him tonight." "And the diary?" Fleur asked. "You can't just walk into Malfoy Manor." "I'm not planning to walk into Malfoy Manor." Harry looked at her steadily. "Narcissa lives in Malfoy Manor. She knows where the diary is kept. She also has a debt acknowledged and signed. He paused. And she would very much prefer her son not to be raised under the same roof as a soul container. Fleur looked at him for a long moment. You planned this already. I saw where it was going, Harry said. There's a difference. You are, she stopped. Strange, he offered. I was going to say exceptional, she said. But I see you're determined to put words in my mouth. Harry did smile then, a real one, not half restrained. Exceptional, he repeated. That's generous. It's accurate, she said, with the matter-of-fact certainty of someone stating something that does not require generosity because it is simply true, and she held his gaze for a moment before looking back at the rain, and Harry looked at the rain too, and neither of them said anything else because it didn't need anything else. Ragnarok agreed to the basilisk venom request within 30 seconds of being asked, which suggested he had either anticipated it or had very fast decision-making processes. Harry suspected both. He would have it by morning, Ragnarok said, in a containment capsule designed for exactly this purpose, and he named a figure for the cost that Harry paid from the secondary vault account without blinking because he had learned not to blink at numbers anymore. Dumbledore caught him on the way out. Horcrux, Dumbledore said quietly. Diary, Harry confirmed. Tomorrow. Do you need? I have what I need. Harry looked at him. But I'd like you to keep the ministry occupied tomorrow morning. The observer Fudge sent tonight will have reported the ceremony. Fudge will want to do something about it first thing. If you can be in his office at 9, talking, keeping his attention, you want me to babysit the minister. I want you to diplomatically engage with the minister, Harry said, in a way that prevents him from doing anything precipitate while I deal with a more pressing problem. Dumbledore looked at him. You're deploying me, he said. You said you'd help, Harry said. I did. He paused. I'll be in Fudge's office at 9. A beat. Do try not to get hurt. I'll try, Harry said, with the polite sincerity of someone who was not particularly worried about it. He found Fleur outside, waiting. The rain had finally stopped. The alley beyond the courtyard door smelled of wet stone and something green and alive, and the city's magical heart was ticking along quietly under all of it, warm and complex and full of people who had no idea that a very significant Thursday had just concluded. Well, Fleur said. Well, Harry agreed. They walked out into the damp evening, the ceremony behind them and tomorrow already taking shape in the space ahead, and the Stormborn thread in Harry's chest ran 40 warm lights bright and the Peveril magic hummed its patient, truth-oriented hum and the Potter core was steady and direct and ready, and Harry walked through it all with his hands in his pockets and his shoulders straight and the absolute, settled certainty of someone who has become entirely themselves and is finding, for the first time, that this is enough. More than enough. Then the explosion hit. Not metaphorical, an actual concussive blast from the direction of Nocturne Alley, 40 yards away, that lit the wet cobblestones orange and sent a shockwave through the ambient magic of the street like a stone through a still pond. Screaming from that direction, and the sharp crack of apparition, and then another explosion, smaller, more controlled, that Harry recognized even before he turned as structured offensive magic. A fight, not an accident. He was already moving before Fleur finished turning. Harry, she started. Stay back, he said, and then amended, or come. Your choice. She came. He turned the corner into Nocturne Alley and found a man in dark robes with a silver mask standing over something on the ground, his wand raised, and two other figures running away down the alley's far end. The man in the mask was Lucius Malfoy. Harry didn't need to see the face. The precise posture, the white blonde hair visible at the collar, the way he held his wand. And on the ground, clutching a leather satchel, was a goblin courier. Not from Gringotts, different livery, private service. Lucius had intercepted a courier. Harry looked at the satchel and felt the Stormborn thread pulse with sudden intense recognition. The diary was in the satchel. He didn't know how Lucius had known it was moving. Perhaps Narcissa had been watched more carefully than she'd realized, or perhaps Lucius had simply guessed that the night of the ceremony was the right night for exactly this kind of move. Either way, he was standing in Knockturn Alley with the diary he'd just taken, and the goblin courier on the ground was injured and the alley smelled like dark magic and burnt air. Lucius turned. He saw Harry. The silver mask didn't hide the pause, a full second of stillness that was not recognition but recalculation. He was looking at a 10-year-old boy in new green robes standing at the entrance to Knockturn Alley with the absolute absence of any fear on his face whatsoever. "Mr. Potter," Lucius said, and his voice was smooth and amused and performed, because Lucius Malfoy was a man who defaulted to performance when he needed time to think. "Put the satchel down," Harry said. Lucius laughed. Not aggressively, with the condescending warmth of someone managing an amusing inconvenience. "How extraordinary. You're quite the topic of conversation today, aren't you?" The little ceremony, the new title, he lifted the satchel slightly. "Chasing goblins in dark alleys." "I'm not chasing goblins," Harry said. "I'm talking to you." "The satchel. Put it down." "You're a child," Lucius said, amiably. "And you're alone." "I'm not alone," Harry said. Fleur stepped up beside him. Lucius glanced at her. "An escort." How? The Stormborn magic moved before Harry consciously decided to move it. Not explosively, precisely. He reached toward the satchel the way he'd reached toward the garden wall and thought not take, which was force, but where should this be, which was the Peveril truth logic, and the satchel left Lucius Malfoy's hand so cleanly and completely that for a moment Lucius simply stood there with his fingers open, looking at them, genuinely uncertain what had happened. The satchel landed in Harry's left hand. Lucius looked up. His voice had lost the amusement. "That," he said carefully, "was, don't," Harry said. He held the satchel and looked at Lucius with the same steady, unafraid attention he'd turned on Fudge and Dumbledore and the Queen herself. "I know what's in here. I know what you were going to do with it. I know about your network, I know about your ministry contacts, and I have documentation from Gringotts that details your role in the binding suppression arrangements that were made regarding me." He paused. "I am not interested in destroying you. Your wife is owed a debt from me and I intend to honor it. But if you lift that wand, I will stop being uninterested very quickly." The alley was completely silent except for the drip of water from a broken drainpipe and the distant sound of London traffic a world away. Lucius Malfoy stood very still. Behind the silver mask, which was theater, not protection, because he wasn't at a formal event and had put it on in the alley like a costume, Harry could read the calculation happening. Lucius was very intelligent and entirely self-interested, and the math was becoming clear to him, a 10-year-old who had just removed an object from his hand without visible effort, who had no fear of him, who knew the exact shape of his crimes and had chosen not to deploy them yet, was either bluffing or was exactly what the ceremony today had suggested he was. Lucius Malfoy had survived as long as he had by knowing which situations were not recoverable. He lowered his wand. "This isn't finished," he said. "I know," Harry said. "It will be, though. Eventually." He kept his tone completely even. "Go home to your son." Something moved behind Lucius Malfoy's eyes at the mention of Draco, something that was not entirely performance, not entirely calculation, something that lived in the complicated territory between a man's worst choices and his most human ones. Then it was gone, masked over, and he turned and walked down Knockturn Alley without looking back, his robes precise in the dark and his posture impeccable, because Lucius Malfoy could not afford to look anything other than impeccable, ever, especially in retreat. Harry watched him go. Then he looked at the injured goblin on the ground, who was sitting up and looking at him with the expression of someone who has had a very eventful evening. "Are you all right?" Harry asked. "Bruised," the goblin said. "Not broken." It looked at the satchel. "You have what was coming to Director Ragnarok?" "Yes." "Then my commission is fulfilled." The goblin got to its feet with dignity. "Thank you." Harry handed it a card with the Potter Manor Fleur address and told it Tippy would look after the bruises, then turned back to Fleur, who was looking at him with the expression she now wore around him that was not calculating, not assessing, not performing diplomacy. Just her, looking at him. "Are you always going to be like this?" she asked. "Like what?" "Like someone who disarms Lucius Malfoy in an alley and then asks a goblin if they're all right." Harry considered this. "Probably yes," he said. "Is that a problem?" Fleur looked at him for one more moment. "No," she said. "It's really not." They walked back out of Nocturne Alley together, and the diary was in Harry's hand and the Stormborn thread was steady and certain, and the city was loud and alive around them, and by tomorrow morning there would be one fewer Horcrux in the world, and Fudge would be in a meeting with Dumbledore, and Narcissa Malfoy would wake up knowing the debt was already being honored. A significant Thursday, all told. And it wasn't even midnight yet. Chapter 5. The Bindings Shadow. The basilisk venom arrived at 7 in the morning in a lead-lined box the size of a shoebox, carried by a Gringotts courier who handed it to Harry at the gate with both hands and the careful posture of someone transporting something that could dissolve the gate itself if mishandled. Harry signed for it, brought it inside, set it on the study desk next to the diary. The diary looked ordinary. Black cover, no title, slightly worn at the spine, the kind of object that would sit on a shelf for years without attracting attention. But the Stormborn thread reacted to it the way it had reacted to the fragment in his scar, that same foreign signal quality, something in it that operated on a frequency adjacent to living magic but wrong in the specific way that things which should not exist are wrong. Cold where it should be warm. Still where magic was never still. Harry sat across from it and looked at it for a while. Fleur came in at 7:15 with tea she'd made herself. Tippy had apparently been commandeered for an intensive cleaning project in the East Wing that the elf had decided was urgent today of all days, which Harry suspected was Tippy's version of stress management. Fleur set a cup in front of him and sat in the opposite chair and looked at the diary. "Tom Marvolo Riddle," she said. "That's what Sylvain found in the residue signature when I described it to her last night." "Voldemort's birth name," Harry said. "He made this when he was 16. A school diary. He put a piece of himself into it and then passed it to Lucius Malfoy to use at the right moment." Fleur wrapped her hands around her own cup. "Sylvain says a diary Horcrux is the most dangerous kind because it can communicate. It can reach into someone's mind through writing, establish a connection, feed on their energy while appearing to be helpful. A parasite that presents as a friend," Harry said. "Yes." Harry looked at the diary. Thought about 10 years of carrying a piece of the same soul in his scar. Thought about what it had tried to do during the removal, the grief, the fear, the attempt to convince him that losing it was losing something essential. The diary would do the same, just through words on a page instead of raw emotional pressure. "How do we do it?" Fleur asked. Harry opened the lead-lined box. The venom was in a sealed glass capsule inside a secondary containment of thick rubber, amber-colored and viscous, small enough to fit in a closed fist. "I opened the capsule over the diary," he said. "The venom destroys the anchoring magic and the soul fragment simultaneously. The magic that holds the Horcrux together can't survive basilisk venom. It's not a counter-curse, it's a dissolution. It doesn't argue with the Horcrux's defenses. It just ends them. And the diary will resist," Fleur said. "It'll try. Harry." She leaned forward slightly. "A diary Horcrux resists through psychological attack. When you open it and introduce the venom, it will know what's happening. It has Voldemort's intelligence, his cunning, his ability to find what a person is most vulnerable to and use it." She held his gaze. "It will go through you. What you care about, what frightens you, what you doubt about yourself. It will use whatever it can find. Then it'll have a short list," Harry said. "Don't underestimate it." "I'm not." Harry looked at the diary. "But it was made by a 16-year-old boy who had never met me. Whatever it finds, I've already thought about. I spent 10 years with nothing to do but think." Fleur looked at him for a moment. Then she sat back. "I'll anchor again. The way I did with Sylvain. You don't have to, I know I don't have to, she said. I'm choosing to. There's a difference. She met his eyes with a steadiness that was entirely her own. Also, you're going to need someone to pull you back if it gets its hooks in deeper than you expect. You're not infallible, Harry. You're exceptional. That's not the same thing. Harry held her gaze. All right, he said. Thank you. Stop thanking me and open the diary. He opened the diary. Not the capsule, just the cover, to confirm what they were dealing with. The pages were yellowed at the edges and looked blank, but the moment the cover opened, the air in the room changed, the same way the air had changed at Gringotts when the numbers began appearing. A pressure. An awareness. Something that was not alive in any way that mattered but was paying attention with the full weight of 50 years of accumulated, purposeful malice. Harry picked up a quill. Wrote a single line in the diary's first page. I know what you are. The ink absorbed into the page. For a moment, nothing. Then the writing faded and new words appeared in a different hand, neat, precise, the handwriting of a 16-year-old who had practiced his penmanship the way he had practiced everything, with obsessive, controlled perfection. And I know what you are, Harry Potter. More than you do, I think. More than anyone has told you yet. It already knows my name, Harry said. Of course it does, Fleur said from behind him. It was made by someone obsessed with you. Harry wrote, then we have something in common. A pause. Then, you're not afraid. That's interesting. Everyone who has opened this diary has been afraid. Children, mostly. They come looking for a friend and they find one. You came looking for something else entirely. Yes, Harry wrote. I came to end you. The temperature in the room dropped by several degrees. Not the diary's doing, Harry felt it as an emotional signal more than a physical one, the thing inside the diary orienting its full attention, something that in a living person would have been called anger but in a fragment of a dead Dark Lord's soul was simply the redirection of all available will toward a single purpose. You can't end me, the diary wrote. I am a piece of something that cannot be ended. He is still out there. Diminished, not destroyed. And when he returns, as he will, the things you have gathered around you, the goblins, the Veela, the old man who bound you for your own good, none of them will protect you from what comes next. He marked you as his equal. Do you know what that means? It means he will come for you specifically, personally, with everything he has. And you are 10 years old. Harry read this. Then he wrote, I know about the prophecy. I know about the other Horcruxes. I know you were designed to be used against a child who didn't know what she was walking into. I'm not that child. No, the diary agreed, and there was something different in the quality of the words now, less like bait and more like genuine assessment. You're not. Which is strange. Which is, I'll admit, surprising. Most things about you should be different. You should be damaged. Broken. Afraid. You were bound for 10 years and left with people who despised you and made to feel like nothing. And yet here you are. Harry's jaw tightened. Not because it was hurting him, but because it was doing exactly what Fleur had said. It was searching. Here I am, he wrote. Don't you wonder, the diary wrote, what you would have been without the bindings. Not what you are now. What you were meant to be, before anyone put their hands on you and decided what shape you should be allowed to take. Don't you want to know what was stolen? It's trying to make you angry, Fleur said quietly. She was standing just behind his right shoulder, close enough that he could feel the warmth of her Veela resonance, that counterpoint that Sylvain had used in the soul fragment removal. I know, Harry said. He wrote, nothing was stolen that I don't already have back. You have your power back, the diary wrote. You have your name back. But what about the years? The childhood? The parents who should have raised you and didn't because of what I did? The life you should have had? The room was very quiet. Harry, Fleur said. I know, he said again. His voice was steady. He wrote, that's grief. Not doubt. I know the difference. A pause. Longer than the others. Then, you're going to destroy me now. Yes, Harry wrote. He will still come back. I know. And when he does, Harry wrote, I'll deal with it. The same way I'm dealing with this. He set down the quill. Picked up the rubber-wrapped capsule. Looked at the diary one final time. Directly. He broke the capsule's seal. What happened next lasted about 4 seconds and felt longer. The venom hit the open page and the diary screamed, not in sound, in magic, a shockwave of dark energy that sent the study's books rattling on their shelves and blew the window open and pushed hard against the Stormborn thread in a way that would have been overwhelming if Fleur's resonance hadn't been right there, steady and present and warm, a hand on the line while the water ran. The diary tried one more time. Not words, it was past words. It went directly for the emotional architecture, for the grief-shaped space that it had found, and for a single, terrible second Harry felt it, the weight of everything that had been taken, the years in the cupboard, the parents he'd never known, the life that had been carefully prevented from existing, all of it arriving at once in a wave that was as real as anything he'd ever felt, and then Fleur's hand was on his shoulder. Actual contact, firm and grounding. It's not yours, she said. Not gently, clearly. The way you tell someone a fact they need to hear. The grief is real. The anger is yours. But this weight right now, is the Horcrux. Let it go. Harry breathed in. He let it go. The venom finished its work. The diary made one final sound, a compression of air, a sense of something being unmade at a fundamental level, and then it was just a book. Ruined, waterlogged with venom, the pages dissolving at the edges. Gone. The cold wrongness in the room evaporated instantly, like stepping out of a shadow. Harry set the empty capsule down. He became aware, slowly, that his hands were completely steady. That the study was bright and warm and smelled like old books and tea. That Fleur's hand was still on his shoulder. She took it back. Neither of them commented on it. That's two, Harry said. His voice was normal. Yes, Fleur said. 5 to find. 5 to find. She sat back down in her chair and picked up her tea with the deliberate normalcy of someone choosing to let a moment be what it was and move past it. Ragnarok has information on the locket. Regulus Black retrieved it from Voldemort's hiding place before he died. Sylvain knew Regulus through an old connection. The locket may be in Grimmauld Place. Harry filed that away. After Hogwarts. After Hogwarts, she agreed. Hogwarts was 11 months away. Harry was 10, would be 11 in 4 weeks, and would receive his Hogwarts letter then and begin in September. A lot would happen before September and a great deal more would happen after it, and he was beginning to understand that the prophecy's resolution was not a single moment but an accumulation of decisions, each one moving the board in a direction, and the most important thing was not to move fast but to move right. He said as much to Fleur. She considered it. That's mature thinking for someone who just destroyed a Horcrux. I had a very intense morning. She looked at him over her tea with that particular expression that was now so familiar it had its own specific place in his understanding of her, the one that was somewhere between exasperated and something warmer that she hadn't fully named, and probably wouldn't for a while, and Harry had decided he was content to wait because patience was apparently one of the things the bindings had given him by accident, 10 years of waiting having produced a genuinely formidable capacity for it. 3 hours later, the ministry arrived. Not Fudge. Fudge was, presumably, still in a meeting with Dumbledore at the ministry, and Harry appreciated the tidy efficiency of that arrangement every time he thought about it. Instead it was 2 senior aurors and a woman in formal legal robes who introduced herself as Madame Hopkirk, the head of the improper use of magic office, and who had the manner of someone who believed rules were load-bearing walls and removing any of them would cause the whole structure to fall down. Harry received them in the sitting room. He did not ask Fleur to leave. She sat in the window seat with a book she wasn't reading, and the Aurors clocked her Veela identity immediately and adjusted their posture by degrees that told Harry they'd been briefed on the ceremony and were uncertain how to incorporate it into their threat assessment. He stored this information. "Mr. Potter," Madam Hopkirk said, setting a document case on the low table between them, "the Ministry has reviewed the Gringotts inheritance assessment and we have significant legal concerns." "All right," Harry said. She seemed briefly thrown by the lack of defense. "The assessment's findings regarding certain bindings placed on your magical core raise questions that the Ministry believes require, Madam Hopkirk," Harry said pleasantly. "I'd like you to tell me what the Ministry actually wants from this conversation. Not what it has concerns about, what it wants. It'll save us both quite a bit of time." She looked at him. Then at the Aurors. Then back at Harry, recalibrating. "The Ministry wants assurance," she said, more directly, "that you are not, that your current situation will not lead to, instability." "Instability," Harry repeated. "Your power levels, as reported by Gringotts, are," she chose her word carefully, "significant. And you are 10 years old, and recently removed from a particular living situation, and the Ministry has a duty, to ensure I don't accidentally level something," Harry said. "To ensure your welfare and the safety of, to ensure I don't accidentally level something," Harry said again, without heat. "I understand. That's a legitimate concern and I'm not dismissing it." He looked at her steadily. "But the Ministry's preferred solution, historically, has been to suppress rather than educate. Bind rather than train. Remove rather than support. And I think we can both see how that worked out." Hopkirk's mouth tightened. "I am not going to destabilize anything," Harry said. "I am going to go to Hogwarts in September and learn and spend the time between now and then doing exactly what I've been doing, managing my own affairs, which I am entirely capable of doing, as the past week should have demonstrated." He paused. "If the Ministry wants to establish a formal channel for communication regarding anything that genuinely intersects with public safety, I'm open to that. Ragnarok can arrange the terms." "A formal channel," Hopkirk said slowly. "Between the Ministry, Gringotts as my legal representative, and the Veela Nation as my sovereign recognition partner. Documented, transparent, legally binding on all sides." He looked at her with the clear, direct attention that he'd now deployed on Dumbledore and Fudge and Lucius Malfoy and a Horcrux diary all within the same week. "Not a supervision arrangement. A communication arrangement. There's a difference." Hopkirk looked at her documents. Then at the Aurors. Then back at Harry. "That," she said carefully, "might be something the Minister would consider." "Good." Harry stood, which moved the conversation toward its conclusion. "I'll have Ragnarok draft the proposal. You'll have it by Monday." He held the sitting room door open. "Thank you for coming." She gathered her documents with the slightly uncertain efficiency of someone who had come to deliver conditions and was leaving with homework. When the ward alarm registered their departure, Fleur looked up from her unread book. "A formal communication channel," she said. "If the Ministry has a legitimate avenue for raising genuine concerns, Fudge has less excuse for extra-legal action," Harry said. "And if they try extra-legal action anyway, the existence of the channel makes it look worse for them." He sat back down. "It also gives Ragnarok's office an official role in my affairs, which strengthens the pact, which is good for Ragnarok, which keeps him motivated." Fleur studied him. "You think about multiple outcomes simultaneously." "I think about what each person in a situation actually wants," Harry said. "Then I find the arrangement where as many of them as possible get something close to what they want while I get what I need. It's not complicated, it's just," he paused, "thorough. It's not how most 10-year-olds think. Most 10-year-olds haven't spent a decade figuring out how to survive without any resources," Harry said, not bitterly. "It turns out being powerless is very good training for understanding power." Fleur was quiet for a moment. "The things the diary said to you," she said. "About what was stolen." "Did it?" "Yes," Harry said simply. She waited. I meant what I said to it, he continued. The grief is real. The anger is real. But I'm not going to spend time I have now mourning time I didn't have then. It's not a useful trade. He looked at the window, the garden beyond, the oak wood at the end of the path. I have the house. I have the name. I have the magic. I have people I'm starting to trust. He glanced at her briefly. That's more than it was a week ago. You're allowed to grieve it, you know, she said quietly. You don't have to be strategic about everything. I know. He turned the teacup in his hands. I will. Later, probably. When things are less busy. She accepted this. She understood, he thought, the difference between suppression and deferral. She was perceptive enough to know which one he was doing, and honest enough not to press him about the one that was genuinely his choice. Narcissa came at 4, and she came quickly, which meant she'd heard about the previous night. She came through the front door with the controlled urgency of someone who had been very calm for a long time and was approaching the edge of it, and Harry met her in the entrance hall and she looked at him and said, "He knows I came to the ceremony." "How bad?" Harry asked. "He is controlled." Her voice was precise. "But he knows I called in the debt. He knows about the diary. He spent the morning at the ministry and came home and he did not speak to me or to Draco, and that is how he is when he is deciding something." She paused. "I need to know if you got the diary." "It's destroyed," Harry said. The relief that crossed Narcissa Malfoy's face was the most human thing he'd seen from her. It lasted exactly 2 seconds and then was folded away with practiced efficiency, but it had been real, the pure, structural relief of someone who has been holding a weight they didn't choose for a very long time. "Come in," Harry said. "Tell me what you think he'll do." They went to the study, 4 people now, Harry and Narcissa and Fleur, and Ragnarok, who had arrived just before Narcissa with the Monday proposal draft and had stayed because he recognized a war council when he was in one. They sat around the desk with the Gringotts documents and the Horcrux notes and Narcissa's knowledge of Lucius Malfoy's network, and they worked. Lucius, Narcissa said, would not move openly. He was too exposed, the ministry had his name in too many inconvenient places for him to do anything that drew direct attention. But he had resources, and he had contacts in the old dark network that hadn't publicly realigned, and he had what she called his insurance, a set of arrangements with people who owed him favors and would not be traced easily. "He'll try to rebind you," she said. "Not personally. He'll find someone, a curse specialist, someone with the technical skill, and he'll arrange it to look like an accident. A contaminated object, a poisoned letter, something ambient." She looked at Harry steadily. "He believes the bindings are what made you manageable. If he can restore even a fraction of them, he believes the situation becomes controllable again." "A rebinding attempt," Fleur said. "On an active sovereign of the Veela Nation." Her voice had taken on a quality Harry hadn't heard from her before, very quiet, very precise, and considerably colder than usual. "He may not fully credit the recognition," Narcissa said. "He should," Fleur said. "He should," Narcissa agreed. "He is making the mistake that people make when they are accustomed to having more power than everyone else. He is assuming that the rules that apply to others do not apply to him." Harry had been listening with his hands flat on the desk, looking at the documents. "He'll try it soon," he said. "The longer he waits, the more established my position becomes. He knows that." He looked at Ragnarok. "Can Gringotts ward against a contamination-style binding attempt? Something incoming rather than placed in person?" "It can be done," Ragnarok said. "Your wards are Potter family wards, very old, primarily defensive. Adding a binding-specific intercept layer is technically straightforward. I can have Cursebreakers here tomorrow morning." "Do it." Harry looked at Narcissa. "Is Draco at home tonight?" "Yes." "Does Lucius know where he's going to be tomorrow?" Narcissa's eyes sharpened. "The East Wing. He has morning lessons." A pause. "Why?" Because if Lucius is planning something and he needs a moment of distraction or a leverage point, the people he knows I've engaged with are the most obvious targets. Harry looked at her. Not Draco specifically. But anything that creates noise and requires my attention. He paused. Can you get Draco out of the East Wing tomorrow morning and into the main house without Lucius noticing? Narcissa was quiet for a moment. Yes. Good. You're protecting him, she said. Not with warmth, with the precise acknowledgement of someone who has placed a bet and is watching it pay out. I told you I'd honor the debt, Harry said. That's what honoring it looks like right now. The ward breakers came the next morning at 8, 6 of them in the efficient dark grey attire of Gringotts security staff, and Harry let them work while he sat in the garden with the Peveril library books and continued reading about Horcruxes. He was halfway through a chapter on concealment methods when the lead ward breaker came out to find him. Her name was Grimtooth, introduced herself as such, no other title offered, and she had the manner of someone who found social niceties a waste of time that could be spent on more interesting things, which Harry respected enormously. We found one, she said. Harry looked up. Not a standard binding attempt, she said. Already placed. Dormant, hadn't activated yet, waiting for a trigger. Woven into the gate ward, which is the oldest part of your wards and the part most likely to have a legacy vulnerability. She held out a small sealed container. We removed it cleanly. But Mr. Potter, she paused, which was the first hesitation she'd shown. The signature on this binding is not Lucius Malfoy's. Harry stood up. Whose is it? It's not in any registered signature database, Grimtooth said. Which means it's either a very old casting or a very careful one. She looked at the container. But there are elements of the technique that match the 6 ancient Stormborn suppressions from your inheritance assessment. Harry looked at the container. The 6 ancient bindings. The ones Ragnarok had told him were placed by the Stormborn family themselves 300 years ago. The ones that had been woven into blood rather than core, that predated everything else. He had assumed those were historical, the act of a frightened ancestor, dead and gone. The binding in Grimtooth's container had been placed in the last 6 months. Someone who knows the ancient Stormborn techniques is still active, Harry said. Yes. And they placed this before the assessment. Before the bindings were removed. The dormant trigger suggests it was placed as a failsafe, Grimtooth said. In case the primary bindings were ever removed. This one would have activated and replaced them. The garden was very quiet. The oak wood at the far end moved slowly in the morning air. Harry looked at the container and thought about 300 years of suppression and the mother who had started it and the people who had continued it and the people who were still, even now, trying to maintain it. Someone, somewhere, had a reason to keep the Stormborn line small. Someone who had access to 300-year-old binding techniques and had planted a failsafe in his family's wards without being detected until now. Can you trace it? Harry asked. The magical technique, yes. The specific practitioner, Grimtooth tilted her head. It will take time. Take it, Harry said. I want to know who. He went inside and told Fleur. She listened without interrupting, which he'd noticed was how she operated when something was serious. She stopped everything else and simply paid full attention. When he finished she was quiet for a moment and then she said, the ancient Stormborn bindings were placed by the family. You said Ragnarok told you that. Yes. But the family didn't do this one. No. So either someone in the family is still alive, a branch we don't know about, a descendant who inherited the knowledge, or the knowledge passed out of the family entirely at some point, Harry said. Given that the line was considered dormant for 3 centuries, there's been time. Fleur folded her hands. This is bigger than Lucius. Yes. This is someone who has been suppressing the Stormborn line as a deliberate, long-term project. Not Dumbledore, his bindings were recent and his reasons were his own. This is someone who has been at this for 300 years. An institution, maybe. Or a family. She looked at him. Who benefits from the Stormborn line never emerging? Harry thought about it. Anyone who benefits from the Veela Nation remaining isolated from British wizarding politics, he said slowly. Anyone whose power base depends on the current structure staying intact. The Stormborn Veela alliance was what the nation had instead of ministry access. If that alliance had emerged when it was supposed to, 200 or 300 years ago, the entire political landscape would have developed differently. The ministry was founded in 1707, Fleur said. Yes. Harry looked at her. What was here before that? The Wizards' Council, she said. And then, quietly, which was founded in the late 14th century by a group of old families who decided that magical Britain needed a central governance structure. She paused. Old families who would have had very clear reasons to prefer a world without a Stormborn Veela power axis complicating their arrangements. Which families? Harry asked. Fleur met his gaze. I need to look at the nation's records. The Queen will know, she was alive for it. She was alive for all of it. She stood up. I need to go to the delegation. Go, Harry said. Come back tonight. She nodded and moved toward the door, then stopped. Harry. She turned. This is not a coincidence. The timing. The ceremony happening now, the failsafe activating within days of the bindings being removed, Lucius moving, someone connected to all of this knows that the Stormborn heir has emerged and is trying to close the door again. She looked at him with absolute directness. Be careful today. You're telling me to be careful, Harry said. I'm telling you that being unafraid of things is not the same as being invulnerable to them, she said. They're not the same thing. You know that. He held her gaze. I know that, he said. She left. At noon, Ragnarok sent a message. The containment vessel from the soul fragment removal, the piece of Voldemort's soul extracted from Harry's scar by Sylvain, had been taken to the deepest Gringotts vault for destruction. The destruction was complete. The fragment was gone. Harry sat with this for a while. That was the first Horcrux, in a sense, the original one, the accidental one, the one that had lived in him since infancy. Then the diary. 2 down. 5 remaining. He went to the window. The manor's garden was bright with late morning sun, and the ward breakers were finishing their work on the gate. An arrow was coming back from somewhere with a letter, and the oak wood at the far end of the path was doing its old, patient thing. The house was warm. It smelled like the breakfast Tippy had made 3 hours ago and the beeswax the elves used on the floors, and faintly, distantly, like something that might have been his father's particular brand of disorganized energy and his mother's particular brand of precise, fierce intelligence, preserved in the walls the way all strongly felt lives are preserved in the places they happened. Arrow landed on the windowsill and presented the letter. Harry broke the seal. It was from Dumbledore, brief, in the particular handwriting of someone who had been thinking hard before he wrote. The ministry meeting went well. Fudge is unhappy but uncertain, which is the best available outcome for now. He will accept the communication channel proposal. I believe that is largely your doing. I have also, upon reflection, begun researching the ancient Stormborn suppressions. There is something in the Hogwarts library, specifically the restricted section, that may be relevant. I will look when I return to Scotland next week. I wanted to say, also, I have been thinking about our conversation in the study. I said you were 10 years old as though it meant something. It does not mean what I thought it meant. I understand that now. Albus Harry read it twice. Then he went to his father's desk and wrote back, "Thank you. Find what you can about the original binding family. The Wizards' Council, specifically, founding members. I think the answer is there." Harry he sealed it, gave it to Arrow, and watched the owl go. The afternoon moved. Grimtootha's team finished the ward work and filed their report with Ragnarok and departed with the professional silence of people who were already thinking about the next job. Narcissa sent a short message through the flue, "Draco is safe. Elle was not home this afternoon. Do not know where." Harry wrote back, Thank you. Stay alert. Fleur came back at 5. She came through the front door with the focused energy of someone who has found what they were looking for, and Harry met her in the entrance hall and she went straight to the study without stopping for pleasantries, which he recognized as serious. She laid 3 documents on the desk. Old ones, photocopies of something older, the originals presumably too fragile for travel, on parchment that looked like it had been reproduced by a careful hand rather than by charm. The founding families of the Wizards' Council, she said. 14 families. 12 are names you would recognize, the old British wizarding families, some still active, some not. She pointed to 2 names at the bottom of the list. These 2. I had to ask the Queen's personal archivist because they don't appear in standard British magical history. Harry looked at the names. Burke. Selwyn. Burke is extinct, Fleur said. The line died out in the 18th century. But Selwyn, she pointed to the second document, a lineage chart. Selwyn is not extinct. The family has been quiet for 2 centuries, connected to dark families through marriage but never prominent. Low profile. Deliberately low profile. She looked at him. The current head of the Selwyn line is a woman named Ignatia Selwyn. She is 93 years old, she lives in a fortified property in the Scottish Highlands, and she has never appeared before the Wizengamot. She's been there the whole time, Harry said. The Queen believes so. She says she remembers the Selwyn family opposing the Stormborn Veela Compact when it was first forming, 3 centuries ago. She says they argued that the compact would destabilize the old family's governance structures. Fleur paused. They were right. It would have. The whole point was that it would have. And the binding placed in my gate ward, Harry said. Selwyn technique. The Queen recognized it from the description. Fleur's voice was very controlled. Ignatia Selwyn has been maintaining the Stormborn suppression for at least 60 years, she would have been in her 30s when the previous suppression needed renewing. She may have learned it from her predecessor. She paused. The Queen wants her addressed. Addressed how? Formally. A sovereign declaration, officially requesting that she cease interference with the Stormborn Compact. With the Gringotts documentation as evidence of the interference. Fleur met his eyes. It's not a threat. It's a legal instrument. But it means she knows you know. And if she doesn't stop, then it becomes something else, Fleur said. But we do the legal instrument first. Harry looked at the documents. 3 centuries of deliberate suppression, maintained across generations with patience and purpose, by a family that had decided the world was safer with the Stormborn line asleep. Not evil in any theatrical sense, just deeply, methodically committed to a structure they had built and intended to keep. He thought about the fail-safe binding in his gate ward. He thought about the 6 ancient suppressions in his blood. He thought about the original frightened mother who had started it and the institution that had maintained it and the 93-year-old woman in the Highlands who had planted a fail-safe in his family's ward sometime in the last 6 months. Draft the declaration, Harry said. The Queen's archivist is already drafting it, Fleur said. It will be ready tomorrow. The Queen has asked if you will sign it jointly, your name and hers, as co-sovereigns of the compact. She paused. She has never signed anything jointly with anyone. Tell her yes, Harry said. He looked at the lineage chart. 93 years old and still playing a game that had been running for 300. He wondered if Ignatia Selwyn had ever expected to be found. He wondered if she had known, when she planted the failsafe, that she was playing the last move in a very long game. Fleur, he said. She looked at him. How many people know about Ignatia Selwyn right now? You, me, the Queen, the archivist, she said. And Ragnarok, who I told on the way here. Good, Harry said. Keep it that way until the declaration is served. If she hears it's coming before it arrives, she'll prepare defenses. Fleur nodded. Then, are you all right? He looked at the documents. 2 Horcruxes destroyed. The Ministry managed. Dumbledore aligned. Lucius Malfoy's diary gone. A 300-year suppression traced to its source. A joint declaration in progress with the oldest living member of the Veela Nation. Yes, Harry said. And then, because she'd told him he was allowed, because he trusted her with it, it's a lot to have happened in a week. She sat down across from him. Not to strategize. Just to be there. It is, she said. It really is. They sat with that for a while, in the warm study of a house that had been waiting 9 years for someone to come home to it, while the afternoon light moved across the walls and the oak wood settled into evening and the wards held steady around the whole of it, clean and strong and entirely, completely his. Chapter 6, The Storm Settles. The declaration arrived at Ignatia Selwyn's Highland property on a Monday morning, delivered by a Gringotts courier with the specific class of word-piercing authorization that Ragnarok reserved for documents that needed to be received whether the recipient wanted to receive them or not. Harry knew the moment it was delivered. Not because anyone told him. Fleur was still at the leaky cauldron with the delegation, and Ragnarok's confirmation message arrived 20 minutes later, but because the Stormborn thread registered something, a distant shift in whatever 3-century-old arrangement had been sitting on his bloodline, the way a held note changes when the instrument producing it finally stops. Not dramatic. Just a change in the quality of a silence that had been going on so long he'd normalized it. He was in the garden when it happened, working through Peveril exercises, and he stopped and stood still for a moment and let the sensation settle. Then he went inside and ate breakfast and waited. Ignatia Selwyn's response came at 11, not by courier but by direct flow, which was either extremely bold or an indication that she did not care about being subtle anymore. The fireplace in the study turned green and a voice came through it, old, precise, entirely without the quality of someone who had been surprised. "Mr. Potter," she said. "I would like to meet with you." Harry crouched in front of the fireplace. "When?" "Today, if you are willing." "Here or there?" A pause. "There," she said. "I think that is more appropriate, given the circumstances." 2 o'clock, Harry said. "Come alone." "Of course." The flue went dark. Harry sat back on his heels and looked at the empty fireplace for a moment. Fleur was going to have opinions about this. He sent her a message through the delegation's communication system, the Veela equivalent of Elfpost, which was faster and more secure, and her response came back in 4 minutes, "I'm coming." Don't argue. He hadn't been planning to argue. She arrived at 1, gave herself 45 minutes to be angry with him for accepting the meeting without consulting her, then put the anger away and became useful, which was one of her defining qualities. She went through everything they knew about Ignatia Selwyn with the methodical thoroughness of someone who had been doing research since 5 in the morning, which Harry suspected she had. Selwyn was 93, which in wizarding terms was old but not extraordinary. She had no known family. The Selwyn line had narrowed to a single heir with each generation over the past century, as though the family was very carefully managing its own continuity. She had properties in Scotland and in Bruges and what appeared to be a research facility in the Lake District registered as a private magical study institute. She had submitted no public work, attended no Wisengamot sessions, appeared in no social records. She had, however, donated significantly and anonymously to 3 ministry research programs over the past 40 years. 2 of them were in the Department of Mysteries. 1 was in the Bindings and Suppressions Registry. "She's been funding the institutional infrastructure that made your binding possible," Fleur said. Not with surprise, with the flat recognition of someone seeing the last piece of a picture slot into place. "Not directly," Harry said. "She couldn't control exactly how the ministry used it. But she shaped the environment." He looked at the clock. "The Dumbledore bindings, the ministry bindings, she may not have placed them. But she probably made sure the tools and legal frameworks existed to place them." "An architect rather than a builder," Fleur said. "Yes. That's more dangerous in some ways." "In most ways," Harry agreed. Ignatia Selwyn came through the flue at 2 o'clock exactly, and Harry had the immediate and distinct impression of someone who had not become less sharp at 93 but had simply become more concentrated, the way certain substances become more potent when reduced. She was small and white-haired with very dark eyes and the posture of someone who had decided decades ago that age would not affect her bearing and had enforced this decision consistently ever since. She looked at Harry. She looked at Fleur. She sat down in a chair across the desk, the same chair that had held Dumbledore, Fudge, Narcissa, and folded her hands in her lap with the unhurried quality of someone who operated on her own schedule and expected the world to match it. "You found me faster than I expected," she said. "The Queen recognized the technique," Harry said. "Of course she did." Selwyn's voice was dry. "Seraphine. She's been suspicious of my family since the 16th century. I'm surprised she waited this long to make a move." "She waited because the Stormborn heir wasn't available to make the move with her," Harry said. Selwyn looked at him with those dark eyes and said nothing. "I want to understand something," Harry said. "Before we get to what comes next. I want to understand why." He held her gaze. "Not the official reason, not the governance argument about power structures. The actual reason. You've spent 300 years on this. That's not governance. That's something personal." Selwyn was quiet for a long moment. Fleur was very still in the window seat. "My family built something," Selwyn said finally. Not defensively, with the careful precision of someone who has thought about how to say a thing for a very long time and is now saying it. "It took 2 centuries. The Wizards' Council, then the Ministry, then the specific shape of British magical governance, the Wisengamot, the department structures, the international agreements. 200 years of careful construction to create a system that protected magical people in Britain from exposure, from persecution, from the kind of catastrophic visibility that had destroyed our communities in the past." She paused. The Stormborn Veela Compact was not a threat to power. It was a threat to stability. A Veela integrated power axis at the center of British magical governance would have been visible. Loud. Obvious. The kind of thing that attracts attention from people who want to use it or destroy it. "So you suppressed it to protect it," Harry said. "To protect everything around it," she said. "Yes. By deciding for everyone what level of risk was acceptable." She looked at him steadily. "Yes. Without asking. Children cannot consent to the bindings placed on them at birth," she said. "Neither can bloodlines consent to what is done to protect them before they are mature enough to choose. My family made a choice that we believed, that you knew was right," Harry said. Without checking. He kept his voice even. "Dumbledore said the same thing. Different words, same logic. I knew best, so I decided alone, and I will keep deciding alone until someone stops me." Selwyn looked at him for a long moment. The dark eyes were unreadable, but something was moving in them, not guilt, not quite. Something that had been carrying itself as certainty for too long and was now encountering its own weight. "You're not wrong," she said. Harry had not expected that. "I know you're not wrong," she said. "I have known it for some time. The logic was sound at the beginning, the circumstances that produced it were real and the danger was real and the decision was, in its original context, defensible." She paused. But the original context ended. The circumstances changed. And my family kept the decision running because we had become the people who maintained it, and stopping would have required acknowledging that maintaining it past its purpose was no longer protection but control. She looked at Harry. "I placed the failsafe 6 months ago because I felt the primary bindings weakening. Gringotts had been making inquiries that suggested someone was investigating. I placed it as a reflex. And then I sat with what I had done." She paused. "That is why I asked to come here. Not because of the declaration, though the declaration is legally sound and I will comply with it. Because I have been sitting with what I did for 6 months and I would like to say to you, directly, that it was wrong." The study was very quiet. Harry looked at her. He thought about Dumbledore in that same chair, saying I was afraid with the honesty of someone who had carried a wrong thing for too long and set it down at last. He thought about the texture of how these admissions felt, not satisfying exactly, not relieving, but real. Weight actually placed on the table rather than held just above it. I believe you, he said. She looked at him. I believe that you believe it, he said. And I believe the original decision had context that made it feel necessary. And I believe you've been carrying the discomfort of the later decisions for longer than today. He paused. None of that gives you the right to decide for 3 centuries of people what power they were allowed to have. But it does mean this conversation doesn't need to be a war. Selwyn held his gaze. What do you want from me? The knowledge, Harry said. The specific techniques your family developed for Stormborn suppression. All of it, formally transferred to Gringotts and to the Veela Nation's archive. Not so we can use them, so no one can use them without our knowing. He paused. And a cessation of all support to ministry bindings and suppressions research. Your name off the funding structures. That's less than I expected you to ask for, she said. I told you I'm not interested in burning things down, Harry said. Your family built some things that are genuinely useful. The ministry's governance structures have problems, but they're preferable to nothing. I'm not going to dismantle 300 years of institutional work because some of it was wrong. He looked at her. I'm going to fix the parts that are wrong. That takes cooperation, not destruction. Selwyn looked at him for a long moment. Then at Fleur. Then back at Harry. Seraphine's instruments were right about the Stormborn heir, she said. I always hoped they weren't. Because if they were right, you were wrong, Harry said. Yes. She unfolded her hands. I will provide the documentation. You will have it within the week. She paused. There is one more thing. The Selwyn family holds 2 properties that were originally Stormborn holdings, acquired during the period when the line was considered dormant. She met his eyes. I would like to return them. Harry looked at her. Why? Because they were never mine, she said. They were always yours. After Selwyn left, Fleur sat on the edge of the desk and looked at Harry for a long time without speaking. What? Harry asked. I have been trying to figure out how you do that, she said. Do what? Make people tell you the truth. She turned the question in the air between them. It's not that you're threatening. You're not. It's that being dishonest in front of you seems pointless. Like trying to cast a shadow in a room full of windows. She paused. I have been in diplomatic negotiations with people twice my age and I have never seen anyone do what you just did with a woman who has spent 3 centuries outsmarting everyone she's ever met. Harry considered this. I think people want to tell the truth more than they want to lie, he said. Most people. Most of the time. Lying is more work. They just do it because the truth feels dangerous. He looked at the fireplace. I just made it feel less dangerous than the alternative. Fleur looked at him. You're going to be extraordinary, she said. Very quietly, like something she hadn't fully intended to say aloud. Harry looked at her. The afternoon light was coming through the study window and catching her hair, and the Stormborn thread in his chest did its recognition thing, it's this is what it knows thing, and Harry let himself notice it without immediately filing it under important, deal with later. You helped, he said. Today and all of it. This whole week. She shook her head slightly. I translated. You anchored, he said. Twice. Literally and otherwise. It's different. He looked at her directly. I notice what people do, Fleur. And what you do is, it's significant. She held his gaze. Something moved across her face that was not the emissary expression or the assessing expression or the carefully managed diplomat's expression, something closer to the surface than any of those. You're 10, she said, but she said it differently from how everyone else had said it all week. Not dismissive. almost wondering. Like it was the strange part and the rest of it was simply what it was. Yes, he said. A pause. I'll be here for another 2 weeks before the delegation returns to France, she said. The Queen wants me to stay while the communication channel with the ministry is formalized. Good, Harry said. And I'll come back, she said. When you go to Hogwarts. The nation will have an official presence in Britain now. I'll be part of it. Good, Harry said again. She looked at him for another moment, and then she stood up and smoothed her robes and became fully Fleur again, the composed, precise, remarkable Fleur, and Harry let the moment be what it was and move on, because he was 10 and she was 17 and there was more immediate business to attend to, but he also tucked it somewhere careful, the way he tucked things he intended to come back to. Dumbledore's letter arrived Thursday. He'd found it in the Hogwarts restricted section, a handwritten text dated 1692, authored by a Wizards' Council member named Erasmus Burke, which was the other founding family name from Fleur's list. The Burke family had been close with the Selwyns and the document was a private record of the original decision to suppress the Stormborn Compact, complete with the argument Selwyn had given Harry word for word. The document also contained one additional piece of information that Dumbledore had flagged with 3 underlining strokes, which told Harry it was the part that mattered most. The original Stormborn suppression had not started with fear. It had started with a prophecy. Not the one about Harry and Voldemort, a much older one, made by a Veela seer in the 14th century, that said the Stormborn heir who emerged with the compact fully restored would break the old arrangements and build the new ones, and nothing that was before would be after in the same form. Selwyn's ancestor had looked at that prophecy and decided that the old arrangements were worth preserving at any cost. So they had prevented the heir from emerging for 300 years. And Harry had emerged anyway. He stood in the kitchen reading this while Tippy made breakfast behind him and the morning was bright through the windows and Arrow was asleep on the perch in the corner. Break the old arrangements and build the new ones. He thought about the communication channel with the ministry, the first formal diplomatic structure between a British magical sovereign and a foreign nation that bypassed pure ministry control. He thought about the Gringotts Pact, the Veela Alliance, the Selwyn knowledge transfer, Narcissa's debt and what it was already doing to complicate the old pure-blood network certainties. He thought about Dumbledore, who was no longer making decisions alone. He thought about 53 people in a wet courtyard and a moment of compact renewed. The old arrangements were, in fact, already bending. He wrote back to Dumbledore, "Thank you. The prophecy makes the Selwyn family's motivation clearer. I think we should talk about the remaining Horcruxes before September. I'd like your thoughts on Hogwarts specifically, since that's where we're both going to be. Let me know when you're free." He signed it simply Harry, not the full signature, because they were past the full signature. The formal communication channel agreement was signed the following Monday in a room at Gringotts that was, Harry suspected, usually reserved for extremely significant financial transactions. The room had the quality of a place that had absorbed the weight of many consequential decisions and had developed gravity as a result. Ragnarok represented Gringotts. Apollon represented the Veela Nation. Madame Hopkirk, to her credit, had arrived without the Aurors this time, which Harry took as a sign of genuine good faith, or at least genuine strategic intelligence. She had also, he noticed, read the documentation more thoroughly than Fudge, because her questions were precise and substantive rather than political. Harry sat between Ragnarok and Apollon and did not let either of them speak for him, which both of them understood and neither of them resented. The agreement established 3 things. First, a formal communication structure for any ministry actions that might intersect with Harry's affairs or the Veela Nation's British interests. Second, a joint review mechanism for any binding or suppression regulatory work, specifically, an independent panel with Gringotts representation, which effectively ended the ministry's ability to place covert bindings on any magical person without oversight. Third, an acknowledgement, in formal legal language that Ragnarok had clearly enjoyed drafting, that the ancient pacts were not superseded by ministry law and never had been. Fudge was not present. He'd sent Hopkirk and his legal team, which Harry thought was the smart move, Fudge in the room would have made it about politics, and Hopkirk in the room made it about law, and law was what Harry wanted it to be about. It took 4 hours to finalize. Harry signed at last, in the same warmth-leaving way he'd signed everything at Gringotts, and when it was done Ragnarok made the sound that might have been a laugh and Apollon allowed herself a small, genuine smile, and Hopkirk looked at the signed document with the expression of someone who had arrived expecting a fight and found instead an agreement they could actually take back to the minister as a reasonable outcome. "This is going to be a significant document," she said, looking at it. "It's going to be a useful one," Harry said. "That's more important." She looked at him for a moment with something that had moved past her original wariness. "You know," she said, and then stopped. "Yes?" Harry said. "Nothing," she said. "Just, a pause. Good luck at Hogwarts." Harry almost smiled. "Thank you." Narcissa came for dinner that Thursday, which was the last Thursday before the delegation began preparing to return to France. She came alone, without announcement, and Tippy let her in with the specific dignity that the elf reserved for people who had complicated histories but were operating in good faith. She sat at the kitchen table rather than the sitting room or the study, which Harry recognized as a choice. The kitchen was less formal, less loaded, and Narcissa sitting at someone's kitchen table was an act of something that for her probably constituted considerable openness. "Lucius is under investigation," she said, when Tippy had brought the food and left with the tactful efficiency of someone who understood the room. "The binding documentation Ragnarok shared with the Aurors last week, his signature is on 3 of the ministry bindings. He's been asked to present himself to the Wizengamot." "Will he?" Harry asked. "He will if his legal team tells him the alternative is worse." "Which it is." She cut her food with the precise movements of someone who makes precision a habit. "He is angry. Not at me, he doesn't know for certain about my involvement, and without certainty he won't act. But angry at the situation." "And Draco?" Narcissa was quiet for a moment. "Draco knows something has shifted. He is 12 in a month. He is not unobservant." She paused. "He is also, not entirely what his father made him. There is something in him that knows the difference between what he has been told to value and what he actually values. It is small still. But it is there." "The alternative you wanted for him," Harry said. "Yes." "When does he get his Hogwarts letter?" 3 weeks. "Then he'll be at Hogwarts in September," Harry said. "The same time I will." He looked at her. "I'm not going to be his friend because you asked me to be. I don't work that way." "I know," she said. "But I'll give him a fair chance. Based on what he actually does, not what his father did or what his family's name is." Narcissa looked at him with those winter sky eyes. "That is more than I could have asked for." "It's what the debt required," Harry said. "Or near enough." He paused. "How are you?" She looked slightly surprised by the question. Not the content, the fact of being asked. "I am, managing," she said. "You've been managing for a long time," Harry said. She held his gaze. "Yes. After the Wizengamot proceedings," Harry said, "if you need options. There are properties in the Stormborn holdings. Separate from the Potter estates. Some of them are warded and staffed and genuinely good places to live." He said it without weight, like offering someone a coat they might need and not making anything of whether they took it. "I'm not suggesting anything specific. Just that the options exist." Narcissa was quiet for a long moment. "Thank you," she said. "Don't thank me," Harry said. "Eat your dinner. Tippy will be offended if it goes cold." The corner of Narcissa's mouth moved in that 4mm way. She ate her dinner. The delegation left on a Sunday. Not all of them, 3 members were staying in London as part of the new permanent Veela Nation presence, which was a first in 2 centuries and which the 3 members in question seemed to find either exciting or overwhelming depending on the individual. Apollon was staying another week for the final formalities. The Queen had already returned to France after the ceremony, but she had given Harry, privately and without ceremony, a small carved token in the old Veela tradition that Fleur had explained was a direct contact symbol. If he needed to reach the Queen personally, not through official channels but directly, the token was how. Harry kept it in his pocket. Fleur was leaving with the delegation. She came to the manor the morning of the departure, early enough that the dew was still on the garden, and Harry was in the kitchen when she arrived and Tippy let her in with the specific warmth the elf reserved for people she had decided were permanent. Which was, Harry had noticed, how Tippy treated Fleur. She sat at the kitchen table with tea and they talked for a while about logistics, the communication channel, the formal documents, the Horcrux hunt that would resume in September when Harry was at Hogwarts and had access to the restricted library and Dumbledore as a regular resource. Fleur had compiled a summary of everything the Veela Nation's archive held on Horcrux methodology, which she gave him in a sealed document that was charmed to be readable only by him. He took it and put it in the study. When he came back she was looking out the kitchen window at the garden. "I have been thinking," she said, "about something the diary said to you." Harry sat down. "About what was stolen," she said. "The years. The childhood." "Fleur, let me finish." She turned from the window. "I have been thinking about it because I think you deflected it. Not incorrectly, you were right that the grief and the anger are real and the diary was weaponizing them. But you said you'd deal with it later, when things were less busy." She looked at him with the directness she used when she'd decided to say something and was saying it completely. "Things are always going to be busy. The Horcruxes, the Ministry, Hogwarts, the Selwyn knowledge transfer, Voldemort eventually, there is always going to be a reason to defer the personal things." Harry looked at his tea. "I'm not saying fall apart," she said. "I'm saying don't forget that it's allowed. Whatever you lost. Allowing yourself to know what it cost doesn't make you less capable of dealing with what comes next." He was quiet for a moment. "My parents would have been good," he said. "I think. What I've read and what Dumbledore said, they would have been genuinely good parents. Loud and funny and slightly chaotic and very loving." He turned the cup in his hands. "I grew up in a house where I was the problem. The whole time. Every single day, I was the problem that they hadn't asked for. And I got so good at making myself small and manageable that by the time the bindings came off I almost didn't know what I was supposed to feel like taking up full space." He paused. "I know what I missed," he said. "I just don't know what I missed it for. What it would have felt like to have it. And that's the part one can't grieve properly yet, because I don't know the shape of it." He looked up. "Does that make sense?" "Yes," Fleur said. Quietly, entirely. "I'll figure it out," he said. "I think Hogwarts will help. New context. Actually being a student rather than," he almost smiled. "Whatever I've been this week." "You've been remarkable this week," she said. "You keep saying that. Because it keeps being true." She stood, which meant it was nearly time. "Write to me," she said. "Not about the Horcruxes. About the normal things. Whether the food at Hogwarts is good and whether you find the restricted section as useful as you're hoping and whether you're all right." She paused. "I would like to know those things." Harry looked at her. "I'll write," he said. She picked up her bag. Stood at the kitchen door. The morning light was doing that particular amber thing that late July mornings did, full and warm and slightly reckless, and Fleur in the kitchen doorway was briefly and entirely herself, not the emissary or the diplomat or the remarkably capable 17-year-old who had come to London expecting a traumatized child and found something entirely different, but just Fleur, looking at him with everything she hadn't said still present in the quality of the look. "Take care of yourself, Harry," she said. "You too," he said. She left. He sat in the kitchen for a while, listening to the house settle around him. Arrow was somewhere in the Ollery. Tippy was in the East Wing doing something organizational. The garden was moving slowly in the summer air, and the oak wood at the end of the path was its usual patient, ancient self. He was 10 years old. He had a house. He had allies, real ones, people who had chosen him with full information rather than obligation. He had his magic, fully realized, 3 threads of it running clean and strong and entirely his. He had a communication channel with the Ministry and a Veela Nation compact and a Gringotts partnership and a Dumbledore who was, slowly and genuinely, recalibrating. He had 2 Horcruxes destroyed and 5 to find and a prophecy to fulfill at some point in the future that felt, for the first time, like something he was moving toward rather than something being moved toward him. He had a week until his Hogwarts letter arrived. He went to the study, sat at his father's desk, opened the Peveril Library's volume on advanced magical theory, and started reading from the beginning. Not for a specific purpose. Just because it was interesting, and he was here, and he had time, and reading in a warm room in his own house on a summer morning while the world went about its business was, quietly, privately, in the specific way of things that cost something to arrive at, one of the best things he had ever done. The Hogwarts letter came 8 days later. Harry was in the garden when Arrow brought it, the heavy cream envelope with the wax seal and the familiar crest. He opened it sitting in the long grass with his back against the old stone wall he'd rebuilt on his first morning, the one that was now structurally sound for the first time in 60 years. Dear Mr. Potter, we are pleased to inform you that you have been accepted at Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry. He read through to the end. The supply list. The term start date. The instruction to purchase equipment from Diagon Alley. He folded the letter and sat with it for a moment. He thought about going to Hogwarts the way Harry Potter had always been supposed to go, not small and uncertain and carrying the compressed weight of 10 years of suppression, not the frightened boy with accidental magic and no context and the taste of someone else's soul in his scar, but this. Himself. Clear and grounded and already in possession of the tools he needed, already in relationship with the people who mattered, already engaged with the problems that needed engaging with. He thought about the library and the teachers and the other students, Draco Malfoy in particular, who was going to arrive with his father's certainties and have to revise them somewhere in the vicinity of Harry, which was going to be interesting. He thought about Neville Longbottom, who the prophecy had also touched, who had grown up under a different kind of pressure and whom Harry had already decided he wanted to know. He thought about Fleur's face in the kitchen doorway. He thought about Ragnarok's amber eyes and Apollin's precise voice and Narcissa's 4mm almost smile and the Queen's declaration the instruments were correct and Sylvain's steady hands and Grimtooth's complete absence of social niceties. He thought about Dumbledore in the study chair, setting down a weight he'd carried for a decade, and the specific texture of that moment, not triumphant, not satisfying, just real and necessary and pointing forward. He thought about his mother's love living in the walls of this house. His father climbing the bookshelves. The Stormborn thread in his chest, warm and steady, 40 points of contact with the Veela Nation alive and present in the back of his awareness like a permanent conversation he could join whenever he chose. Harry Potter folded his Hogwarts letter, put it in his pocket, and stood up from the long grass in the garden of his family's house on a bright August morning with the whole of the magical world ahead of him and absolutely no intention of being small in it. He went inside. "Tippy," he said, coming through the kitchen door, "I need to go to Diagon Alley." Tippy appeared with the expression of someone who had been waiting for this. "Of course, Master Harry." "Shall I, and I'd like to invite Neville Longbottom," Harry said. He'd gotten Neville's address from the Gringotts records, which held the full accounting of the prophecy's candidates. He'd been meaning to write for a week. He's getting his letter the same day. It seems like a good time to go shopping together. Tippy's enormous eyes went wide with the delight of someone who had been hoping the master of the house would start doing age-appropriate social things. "Shall I send Arrow, Master Harry?" "Please," Harry said. He sat down at the kitchen table with parchment and wrote a letter to Neville Longbottom, short, direct, friendly without being aggressive about it. "I'm Harry Potter. We've never met but I think we should. Want to get school supplies together? I know a good place for lunch." He signed it Harry and gave it to Tippy for Arrow. Then he wrote to Fleur. This letter was longer. He told her about the Hogwarts letter, and the plan to meet Neville, and the thing he'd been thinking about in the garden, the Peveril magic specific logic and a theory he was developing about how it connected to the prophecy, which he thought she'd find interesting and possibly argue with, which was also fine because her arguments were always precise and made him sharper. He told her that the Queen's token was on the study desk and he checked it every morning, which he wasn't sure was protocol but felt right. He told her that Tippy had made the French pastries again this morning, the ones that had apparently been his father's preference, and that they were still extremely good. He was almost at the end before he wrote, "The diary said things that I haven't stopped thinking about. You were right that I was deferring. I think I've started not deferring. It's happening slowly, but it's happening. I wanted you to know." He sealed it. Gave it to Tippy for the Nation's mail channel. Then he went upstairs, changed into proper clothes for a trip to Diagon Alley, and came back downstairs to find Tippy waiting at the door with the Manor's travel portkey and the expression of someone whose entire Tuesday had just become worthwhile. "Ready, Master Harry?" Harry looked at the house behind him, the full bookshelves visible through the study door, the kitchen warm and smelling of morning, the garden through the back window going on being beautiful and patient in its old established way. He looked at all of it for a moment, deliberately, the way you look at something you want to remember. "Ready," he said. He stepped through the door into the bright August morning, and the storm that had been building for 10 years moved through him and past him and settled into something clear and purposeful and entirely unafraid, and the world, which had been trying for a very long time to decide what to do with Harry Potter, began, at last, to understand that it was Harry Potter who would be deciding. Not the world. Not anymore.